All right, welcome back, everyone. This is Tuesday, June 8th, 2021. We are in open session. The board met in closed session and took no reportable action. At the May 25th, 2021 Board of Education meeting, the retroactive payment related to the salary schedule increase for the former deputy superintendent that was reported out was not consistent with the stated amount in the language of the agenda items background information. The correct amount is the following. For former deputy superintendent, a 2% salary schedule increase to a prorated total salary of $159,999 and a one-time 4% off schedule prorated payment, resulting in a total retroactive payment of $9,536.99 for 2020 to 2021. All right, that was just a little housekeeping from our last meeting. Now we are going to move on to the approval of the agenda order. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so moved by Dr. DiBrienza, seconded by Ms. Latimirak.
All right, Mr. Collins,
Aye.
Ms. Latimirak,
Aye.
Dr. DiBrienza,
Aye.
Mr. Dauber,
Aye.
Mr. Drop.
Aye. Okay, so approved. Dr. Austin, your report.
All right, thank you. My report has two pieces. The second half, I will turn over to Mr. Bahadur Singh. The first half, I just want to thank everyone for the work that went into not only completing the school year, and boy, there was a lot that went into this year, but then I just want to focus for just a moment on the promotion activities to end the year. We told people for the last 6 weeks, 2 months, that we didn't want to do anything to jeopardize our promotional activities, and it worked. And the promotions were spectacular. Didn't matter if it was our 5th grade promotions, if it was our middle school promotions or our high school graduations, each were beautifully done. So much coordination work between our volunteers, our site staff, district staff, our maintenance and operation. And the results were simply spectacular. So thank you to everyone. We were able to send our students off in really just a beautiful way. That was no small task. And you know, we're compared to people all the time, so I'm going to do a little comparison. I read the newspapers and watched clips of what other districts did, and I feel so good about how we were able to send off our students at the end of this year. And again, I'd like to thank our HR team for the way that we also sent off our retirees. I think, again, I talked to other superintendents and asked, you know, what their districts were able to do, and it was limited at best. And, you know, we really tried to take the extra effort to do everything at the highest level we could, given our circumstances. On June 10th, which is Thursday, our entire administrative team for the school district is getting together to do our kickoff for next year. So here we go, right? We are already looking at, well, we have been already, but we're really shifting gears into next year and excited to get going. Now, along those lines, we'll have in front of you tonight 2 assistant principals. And I'd like Mr. Bahadur Singh to invite them both up for introductions. They're both with us here this evening and very excited to meet these two. Mr. Bahadur Singh.
Thanks, Dr. Austin. We are pleased to announce the selection of assistant principals for JLS and Fletcher Middle Schools. I'd like to start by introducing Sebastian Benavides, who will be the assistant principal at JLS. Mr. Benavides is currently an assistant principal in the Fresno Unified School District. He was previously a high school English teacher. He holds an administrative credential and bachelor's degree from Cal State University Fresno and a master's degree from Nashville University. Welcome.
Thank you, board. Thank you, Dr. Austin. Thank you, Mr. Bahadur Singh, Ms. Zicki. Thank you so much. I just honestly, spending some time with the staff at JLS, Christopher Grierson, Hanicia Seta, meeting all of you. I truly feel blessed and honored to be here at Palo Alto Unified School District and at JLS. And if there's one message I could share with everyone is I just plan on taking care of our students and our staff just like I would my own family. I have 6 sons and 5 granddaughters and 1 grandson. And so I will definitely take care of our students just as I would any of them. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Jose Sanchez, who will be the assistant principal at Fletcher Middle School. Mr. Sanchez is currently an assistant principal at a middle school in the Jefferson Union School District. Prior to that position, he was a dean of academics and a dual immersion teacher at the middle school and high school level. He holds a master's degree in education from the University of California, Berkeley, and a bachelor's degree in history from the University of California, Los Angeles. Welcome.
Hi, I just want to thank everyone for having me here today, and I'm very honored to have the opportunity to be a part of Palo Alto Unified, and I look forward to this coming school year, just get to have the opportunity to get to know the community and be a part of the community and do my part to make an impact on the quality of the education that we provide to our students. So thank you, and I'm really looking forward to this upcoming school year, and I don't have any children yet. My wife and I have been married it'll be 2 years in July, so maybe by the end of this year, we'll be on our way to having our family.
Well, I don't know what we can say after that.
Welcome.
Welcome, gentlemen. Very excited to have you here. I think our future is bright. That's it for my report tonight.
All right, thank you, and thank you to both of you. Okay, we're moving on to open forum. Anyone wishing to address the board on non-agendized items can do so at this time. Again, if the item you wish to speak about is already on the agenda, then please wait until that item comes up to speak. All right. We have a few people, so everyone will have 1.5 minutes to speak. I'll call out 3 at a time, and you'll be unmuted. We have Fei Luo, Deepa Paranjpe, Edith Cohen.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Great. So my son is a rising 6th grader, and he participated in this math placement this year. And his scores on the MDTP show that he's ready for the 7th grade math in all areas. But he didn't meet the 80% cutoff score on the Schoology validation test. So I have questions regarding this 80% cutoff scores. And I just want to know how it was determined and why it's not 60%, 75%, and why it's 80%. And I contacted the math department and tried to get more information regarding how this cutoff score is validated, but I couldn't get any information on that. So here's my questions. I would like to see the evidence to show why the cutoff score is 80%. Thank you.
Thank you. And if we don't answer questions, it's because we can't discuss items that are not agendized, but staff is taking note and we'll take note. Deepa Paranjpe, Edith Cohen, Lena Russell.
Hi, my name is Deepa Paranjpe. I have a rising 6th grader coming from PAUSD Elementary School. And I want to raise the issue of the placement test as well as the previous speaker, except that I want to point out that my goal is not to say anything about whether my son needs to be in a specific grade or not for the math curriculum, because I trust the district to take the right decision on that. I just want to point out that the entire experience of going through the placement, the way the communication was done, the results were shared with us with zero transparency. The entire experience was one of the poorest that I've had with PAUSD. I only really request that we do right by our kids and make sure that everybody is given curriculum that is appropriate for their level, whether this is laning or delaning. I am actually not exactly sure where everybody is on that page, but I really want to make sure that this is brought to the board and there is sufficient discussion, despite the fact that close to 95% people said that they were opposed to delaning. We did implement it. I just want to make sure that this is reevaluated and we do the right by our kids. That's all that I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Edith Cohen, Lena Russell, Kai Bunger Tang.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So I talked about mass placement for a while, and I've been following it for multiple years. And this is an appeal to the board. Ultimately, you're responsible to represent the interests of our students, and I feel this is not done very well in the context of the mass program. So Palo Alto Unified, with its resources, eager students, and qualified teachers, created somehow an obstructive middle school math program that doesn't make sense. It promotes something else, not our students. And this year, a third of Palo Alto sixth of sixth graders took placement tests just to get on a path to 7th grade algebra. Shamefully for us, that path is offered organically, nicely elsewhere in Los Altos, in Cupertino, in Saratoga, in many places, but only available to Palo Alto students with the means and motivations to prepare externally, and then they have to take this test. And data indicates that 45% of our students are ready for such a path, but only a trickle every year are allowed through. So this year, the placement comprised of two tests, one standardized test, the MDTP test, developed by the University of California, a strong predictor of reaching algebra proficiency, and another confidential, calibrated in-house test, a gatekeeper. And this year was the first time that a standardized test.
Thank you. Next, we have Lena Russell, Kai Bunger Tang, Vani Saxena.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. My name is Lena Russell, and I am a mother of a rising sixth grader at Green Middle School. I am also really concerned that the placement tests given to fifth graders this spring were not carefully designed to place the children correctly. The two tests given yielded wildly different results for the same child. I have personally requested test results, and I was given the standardized ones, but I was not allowed to look at the Schoology tests in order to see what the difference is. The sign-up process appears to be flawed as well, I'm sorry to say, from making parents jump through unnecessary hoops of confirming several times that the child does want to take a test, all the way to sending results to a wrong email address for most of the students. And also elementary school teachers for fifth graders were never consulted, and they would be the best source. It's well established that children need challenges in order to develop interest and stay interested in different subjects. We have plenty of parents in our districts who will be able to provide that outside of school, but I'm really concerned about children who won't have this opportunity. I think it needs to be revisited. And I also like to take this opportunity right now to thank all of the hardworking teachers and administrators for the past year and allowing our students to survive the pandemic and actually thrive.
Thank you. Kai Bunger Tang, Vani Saxena, Nils Bunger.
Last year, I missed the 7th grade placement by one question with almost no studying. This time, I was determined to pass the 8th grade placement test. I studied 15 hours per week all year using the syllabus with Khan Academy and other textbooks. But the Schoology test was just too hard. They said the test should take an hour, but by the end of 2 hours, 23 out of 35 students were still there and ran out of time. The questions included topics not on the syllabus, like polynomials. I messaged the director of the test about this. They said it was based on the Common Core, so the test syllabus was incomplete. In my class, no one knows as much material as me. I even helped others study, but I would have had to get double the number of questions right to pass, which is ridiculous. I want a fair test and a fair shot at advancing. I think they tested material that is way too hard for anyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Vani Saxena, Nils Bunger, Emily Lee.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hi, I'm Vani. I'm a rising 7th grader at JLS, and I've loved math ever since I was younger. And I've been taking math outside of school for 2 years, and I've already finished 7th grade math, even when I was in 6th grade, and I still didn't pass the 7th grade math placement. And I've also done part of algebra. And on that transcript in the outside of school class, I received an A grade. And I practiced for the placement test for 2 months prior. And I thought I did really well on the multiple choice questions. I don't understand how I could have gotten one learning target wrong. And the other test, the Schoology test, was complex with some problems similar to the math competitions I used to take, but it was not that hard. I felt a lot of time pressure, but I knew I could have done all the questions if I had a little bit more time. And so I'm really surprised and disappointed that I did not make it into the 8th grade math. And now I feel extremely devastated, discouraged, and disappointed in myself and also the grading system. And I think it's very silly how if you make a mistake on one learning target, you have to repeat the whole year. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily Lee, Nils Bunger, Avery Wang.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, my name is Emily. I'm a rising 6th grader. I took both the MDTP and the Schoology test and have some questions about them. First of all, I would like to know why the Schoology test is much harder than the MDTP test. When I used Khan Academy to practice 6th grade math, I didn't run into any questions as complicated as the ones in the Schoology test. Secondly, the test results only told my score. In my opinion, some of the content of the questions are not straightforward, and some are also describing simple concepts into something more complicated. I would like to see which questions I got right and wrong so I can figure out whether I actually don't know how to answer them, or if I made a careless mistake, or if I just didn't understand what the question was asking for. Lastly, I passed the MDTP test with a full score, but not the Schoology test because my score is 75% and the requirement is 80%. When I studied the chart for the test results for the MDTP test, I noticed that all the critical levels in the MDTP test are between 60 and 75%, which means this test has lower requirements than the Schoology test. This makes me a bit confused because the MDTP test is way easier than the other one for me. Is the critical level for the Schoology test set too high? Nevertheless, even if I'm not qualified to learn 7th grade math concepts, I still wish to learn more and be challenged. Thank you.
Thank you. Nils Bunger, Avery Wang, Arabi.
Hi, everybody. Tonight you heard from my son, Kai. He's learning a lesson in self-advocacy. All he really wants and deserves is a fair assessment to have an opportunity to place into 8th grade math. He passed all the 8 sections of the standard MDTP test, which is well calibrated and used for many placement scenarios. And in fact, he did better than most 7th graders going to 8th grade. He loves math. He puts in the time all year to learn. The Schoology test, as you've been hearing, guess what? He didn't pass it. But, I think that test we really feel is not right. It's not calibrated against anything. It's not given to 7th graders going to 8th grade. I bet you most of those 7th graders wouldn't pass. I have zero problem with Kai learning about disappointment. There's going to be a girl he likes who doesn't like him back. There's going to be a school that he doesn't get into. But I have a problem when kids are set up to fail, which is what I think happened here. My son got exemplary on all his courses. He yearns for challenge. He would clearly get exemplary in 8th grade math. So I want you to ask yourself, how does blocking Kai and kids like him from 8th grade math serve him or his community? So what I would really like to ask for is a chance for us to understand better how the Schoology test is made, if it's really the right level to check against, and really get to a right placement decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Avery Wang, Arabi, Yingwen Huang.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so in the Verde magazine in February of 2020, there was a poll taken after the math modifications to the middle school. Math was announced, and 95% of the respondents were against the delaning initiative. Let's see. So in an article on April 19th, 2021, Dr. Austin said that a small group of parents who want to super accelerate their students were concerned. So a super acceleration in Palo Alto, in contrast, 43% of Los Altos 7th graders take Algebra 1, nearly 8 times more than in Palo Alto. Similar numbers in Saratoga and Cupertino. And these populations are more ethnically and gender diverse. So is this really equity for Palo Alto? I also wanted to comment in the few seconds I have left. A lot of the research on delaning is based on Joe Bowler's Railside report. And I actually have a whole slide deck here, but the study makes extremely strong claims for basically delaning. The data was grossly exaggerated and do not translate into success for students.
Thank you. Arabi, Yingwen Huang, Daniel Gur.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Arabi. As a math educator, testing my students for readiness, for proficiency, for mastery is part of my job. I have been and still am very concerned about the validity of the math placement tests given in PAUSD middle schools. Just to clarify, I'm talking about the validity of the non-standardized exam, which was the Schoology part this time. How do the midterm and final exams administer to the students who take the course compared to these placement tests? Don't you think it's only fair that students presently taking the course and students wanting to place out of the class be held to the same testing standards? Please correct me if I'm wrong in thinking that these tests are not norm-based, but criterion referenced. If these tests measure performance against a fixed set of standards, why is it that at least a couple of criteria are out of syllabus every single year? I think interested parents deserve the answer to all of these questions. I will email these questions to the board members and sincerely hope to get a reply. And kudos to all the kids who spoke today. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And this is a good time to remind everyone, if your time gets cut off, you can email your comments to board@pausd.org, and that will go to each of our board members. Next, we have Yingwen Huang, Daniel Gur, and LM.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good evening. My name is Yingwen Huang, a parent of a rising 6th grader. My daughter Emily just spoke. First of all, I wanted to emphasize the reason my daughter took the math test is because she loves math and hopes to be challenged and learn more in her future math classes. She is self-motivated, work hard, asked to participate in the test herself, got 4 scores in the MDTP test and 75% for the Schoology test, which was still considered not to meet the minimum score in the assessment. The results just gave her scores and told her she was denied. I believe transparency of the test questions and the results is very important. Kids deserve to know what questions they answer right or wrong in both tests. Most importantly, we are very confused about why these 2 tests are so different in terms of the difficulty level and its passing scores. Can't help but wonder, the current cutoff score of 80% for the Schoology test truly reflect the students' math level for placement? We hope PAUSD can please justify its placement with data and keep parents in the loop. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel Gur, LM, Arya Sufiani.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm a parent of 3 students at PUSD, and I would like to ask a question to the board regarding math instruction as well. And the question I'm going to ask is, I think, actually pretty simple. What I would like to hear from you, directed at your community, is any actual evidence of positive educational outcomes of delaning, not advancing talented students, and deploying SPG grading models. And I would like to give you the broadest possible frame to answer this question. You can start literally in the 1970s. That is a 50-year time frame to produce evidence. You can pick any education system from Australia to Canada to the US to Western Europe. And in terms of coming up with any evidence, you can pick the most basic element, and that would be population level evidence published by national governments or supranational organizations such as the OECD. That is, in the research community and policymaking community, the accepted gold standard. Lastly, I would like to just point out that all that needs to be demonstrated is that uplifting disadvantaged students is possible with these measures, while not depressing the achievements of talented students or making everybody perform lower. Again, 50 years, lots of countries, lots of evidence that is easy to grasp. I appreciate your answer on this. I think it's important to make evidence-based decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Arya Sufiani, Michelle Higgins, Rebecca Eisenberg.
Hi, just to ask, this is for non-agendized items, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so I wanted to thank Palo Alto Unified School District for an amazing 2 years of employment. I'm very humbled and I'm very appreciative of the opportunities and the team that I had. Unfortunately, during COVID-19, the district really threw us under the bus, especially with classified. And I would really like it if PAUSD just thinks more about their team and really enough with the yo-yoing. During the COVID-19, we were asked to go to students' homes. We were threatened with layoffs. Now we're getting this $1,800 payment, but it's prorated. So the cafeteria ladies or the people working, small roles are not getting the full 1,800. I really think if Miss Chow or someone else can just look into this matter and really look at taking care of classified staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle Higgins, Rebecca Eisenberg, Lars Johnson.
Hi, thank you. Tonight, we're hearing from many high-achieving students and their parents who believe they've been hard done by in a district whose entire reputation is founded on the achievement of these same students. Families move to Palo Alto from around the world for the excellent schools, rated 10 out of 10 on good schools, touted to home buyers as justification for paying exorbitant prices for the most ordinary shelter. Who aren't we hearing from tonight? We aren't hearing from the students who the district fails year after year, as revealed by disproportionality across any measure you care to poke a stick at. We see this disproportionality in attendance and discipline, in special education designation, and in grades and graduation requirements. We also see it in who feels like they belong, who gets to feel smart, worthwhile, and deserving of their success, and who can't wait to get the hell out of here. We aren't hearing from the large portion of Black families of means who elect to remove their students from PAUSD at the end of elementary school because racial bias runs so deep that they do not trust our schools, our community, to see their child as a person with the same potential, prospects, and smarts as their white and Asian counterparts. Our district is not failing the students you're hearing from tonight. The evidence-based reforms to the middle school math program do not represent a dumbing down, but instead a raising up, ensuring that all students arrive with their options open in 9th grade, rather than closing doors via early tracking of students at age 11. If we accede to the demands of parents who believe a large portion of students should grade skip in middle school, we are complicit.
Thank you. And please email your comments to board@pausd.org. Rebecca Eisenberg, Lars Johnson, Star Teach Out.
Thank you very much. Tonight I want to talk about the new bell schedule for Pali High School next year. It might be for Gun too. We were presented the start and dismissal time as non-negotiable. That start time is said to be 9 a.m., even though state law allows high schools to start at 8:30 a.m., which is why all of our peer schools and basically pretty much any other high school that I could find starts at 8:30 a.m., not at 9 a.m. Getting more sleep might be fine, but the result is that Pali, without negotiation, announced that it intends to dismiss students at 4 p.m. or in some cases 4:10 p.m. Let me tell you what's non-negotiable. What's not actually non-negotiable are sports schedules, because Palo Alto participates in sports leagues with other schools. Now, you may think that sports is not important, but actually still for a large number of low-income students, sports are the only way that they are able to access a college education. When Pally is intentionally launching a non-negotiable sports schedule that requires athletes to miss 1 to 2 hours of school every single day, that is without exception going to harm student athletes. Please change this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Lars Johnson, Star Teach Out, Sarah Woodham. Mr. Johnson, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. This is Lars Johnson, parent of 3 at PAUSD, one survivor of the school system. And I would like to comment on the math wars that are being discussed here in the open forum. We have heard the significant dissatisfaction that parents express, feeling that their students are held back from accelerating their math prowess by being subjected to double skip test. The MDTP version that can be prepped for with test exams that most students ace, and then the PAUSD Schoology versions that is considered too rigorous and for which no prep exams exist. Even worse, students that fail cannot skip 6th grade math, and that means they cannot finish the remaining math curriculum earlier in their high school career, and that doesn't give them enough opportunity to add additional AP classes to further bolster their GPA credentials. If this is not a return to the unhealthy advanced placement arms race we had a few years ago, then I don't know what is. And I urge the board to continue to consider student wellness and mental health in any curriculum decision you make, math and otherwise. I would also like to repeat what I heard from one of the students who studies 15 hours every week all year long at Khan Academy and whatnot, still failed the test. That is very sad, but not because he failed the test. I wish all our students all the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Star Teach Out, Sarah Woodham.
Good evening. I just wanted to share with you some thankfulness many of us at Gunn are feeling for our new principal, Wendy Stratton, who is really rising to the challenges that appeared this year and challenges that sometimes appear to be in our Palo Alto DNA. I'm not speaking for anyone else. I'm just speaking on my own behalf, but I know I speak for other people when we say we thank her for her professionalism, that she balances so well with her warmth and friendliness, her broad perspectives that encompass everything from belongingness to high academic expectations. And then lastly, her willingness to confirm that our traditions continue to support our mission, which sometimes means things have to change or new things need to be tried. So I just want to thank you for selecting her for this position, and we look forward to her growing even deeper skills as she serves our school. Thank you.
Thank you. And last, we have Sarah Woodham.
I thought that, I've heard a lot of the commentary, and I knew there was going to be a lot of commentary around the math laning and skip tests today. So I asked my son, who graduated last year, and he has experience in honors lane maths, just his perspective on it. And this is essentially what he wrote back to me as comments that he wanted to the board. So what math lane are you in? During middle school, every PAUSD student was asked this question, and everybody would tell you that this question was used to measure intelligence. Being in a higher math lane is used as a status symbol, something to brag about, and the push to skip makes it easier for those individuals to do so. There are students who legitimately should be a grade or two ahead in math. Making the passing standard lower isn't helpful at all. It puts students who aren't inherently prepared for such a big jump in a bad position, and this drives extreme tutoring. I understand that parents are scared that their child's potential is not being met, but just about every student I met in honors classes who skipped grades struggled constantly in these honors math classes in high school. This isn't normal, and it shouldn't be normalized. Being at grade level is not a bad thing. Plenty of students who skipped this were stressed and ended up laning down anyway. Students who stayed in their assessed lane were happier and saw those lanes through to the end. I wish I had believed that before, and I hope families take that away now.
Thank you. And that concludes open forum. Next, we're moving on to approval of the consent calendar. On consent, these items are considered routine and will be approved in one action without discussion. If a member of the public wishes to comment on any consent item, they may, or if a board member would like to pull an item from consent, then we'll consider it after consent in action items. We have 2 members of the public who wish to speak on this. You'll each have 3 minutes. Arya Sufiani, Rebecca Eisenberg.
Hi, good evening. So I was just looking at the action item and I wanted to know, will the topic of Dr. Bahadur Singh's emergency credential thing come through tonight, or hello?
We don't typically answer questions, but if you're speaking to an action item, then you can reserve that for when the item comes up. This is for consent items.
Okay, but is this about the consent items, like for the staff leaving and whatnot?
This is for item 4, approval of consent calendar, items A through V.
Okay, my mistake.
No problem. All right, Rebecca Eisenberg.
Thank you very much. So first, I want to actually answer the question that was just asked by the previous speaker. This is the item actually that has the emergency certifications on it, because I was going to speak about that. I also want to speak in more depth about another item, but briefly, there is a declaration of need for fully qualified educators where the district is asking for, by my count, as many as 32 emergency credentials for teachers, for educators who are actually do not have their credentials. But the district is asking for exceptions to that on the grounds that they tried to recruit credentialed teachers for these roles, but they were unable to recruit staff and teachers that actually have the credentials. So I'm going to say what I said before. You all are having a big recruiting and retention problem. Obviously, it's hard to recruit credentialed teachers and other qualified staff and teachers that have their credentials when you don't treat your teachers well, which you clearly do not do well enough based on the fact that good teachers leave and you can't seem to recruit new ones. It's a problem. One thing you need to do is hire more teachers to decrease class sizes. It is ridiculous that class sizes are so large, as many as more than 30 kids in English classes, and these teachers take weeks, sometimes months, to return essays to the students. Learning can't happen in classes this large. It's bad for teachers, bad for students, bad for schools. Hire more teachers. This is awful. And hire teachers by increasing their benefits, getting affordable housing for them. You should know what to do, but you're not doing it. I also wanted to comment on the other consent calendar item about law firm hirings. It looks like you're hiring 5 or 6 more litigation law firms. Why do you insist on using our money, taxpayer money, to fight against the rights of students and families? These litigation law firms are paid with our money to fight against families when families are simply enforcing their students' rights to accommodations as provided for in their IEPs and their 504 plans. These families are seeking just justice when their kids are bullied or beaten up on the classroom for racial reasons. Please stop hiring outside law firms and start treating the students better and enforcing their own rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Sufiani, I'm going to call on you again in case that item F, declaration of need for
Yeah,
fully qualified educators for
yeah.
certificated
So,
employees is what you wanted to talk about.
okay, yeah. So thanks, Ms. Eisenberg. I think this issue could have been resolved had you guys at least supported some classifieds. There are a few of us who have advanced education. I, for one, am getting my master's degree in school counseling. There was another one who has a PhD, a former professor at Stanford. There were a few others who were highly qualified individuals. We could have easily gotten those credentials, but honestly, we're getting paid peanuts to really serve our students. I really think PAUSD should do better and treat us with respect. Like I said before, enough with the yo-yoing, enough with like the unpredictable phone calls from HRs with threats. I mean, I've had so much anxiety the past year with this BS of being told by Anlay, Aria, there's going to be potential layoffs. I mean, what is this nonsense? Get it together, Palo Alto. Treat us with respect. We're helping the kids succeed. And if we can't work right, we definitely can't serve our kids right. Please take care of us.
Thank you. All right. Okay, board colleagues.
I move we accept the consent calendar as presented.
Second.
Okay, so moved by Dr. DiBrienza,
Can I,
seconded by Ms.
can I
Yes.
pull an item, please?
Mr. Collins, you may.
Sorry, can we pull item F, the item we were just discussing?
Yes.
Thank you.
Would you like to make a friendly amendment to your motion?
Oh, yeah, can I motion to amend the original motion to exclude item F?
Second.
Okay, Dr. Austin.
Ms. Latimerik,
Aye.
Mr. Collins,
Aye.
Dr. DiBrienza,
Aye.
Mr. Dauber,
Aye.
Mr. Drop.
Aye. And that was the amendment.
Unfortunately, yeah, that was just the amendment. Sorry about that. My bad.
So now we'll vote on the motion excluding item F, which has been moved by Dr. DiBrienza, seconded by Ms. Latimerek.
We're good. Okay. Dr. DiBrienza.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Latimerik.
Aye.
Mr. Dauber.
Aye.
Mr. Drop.
Aye. Okay, motion passes. Then let's move directly onto item 4F, which is the declaration of need.
So did you want me to speak to it?
Please.
Okay. Dr. Austin or Trent, do you want to speak to, I mean, I think it is a big deal if we have people with less than full credentials teaching. That's something I strongly feel that we should avoid if we can. Do you want to speak to the circumstances and the magnitude of what you're requesting here?
I can start and then I'll turn it to Mr. Bahadur Singh. This is a very standard item. Districts all up and down the state will be doing something similar. Many of these, and perhaps we can write the item differently in the future, are for credential waivers for positions that don't have a credential, meaning that there is no credential that exists for certain classes that we offer. Examples in the past, and I'm not speaking specifically to tonight, but more globally, English teacher who teaches drama. Well, that's what you do. So it is not accurate to say that each of these is a position that is hired because we cannot find someone with a credential. Our job pools are massive right now. In fact, I'll ask Mr. Bahadur Singh at a later date to compare with numbers from the past, but recruitment has not been our issue. But Mr. Bahadur Singh, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll also share that it's just a reminder, this is a maximum of what we need. We're required to report what the maximum needs are. So, just to remind everyone that it's not necessarily that we are going to have all these positions that the state asks us to plan ahead to be able to fill these positions. As Dr. Austin said, some of these are unique situations where some of our staff are getting we're declaring this so that they can qualify to teach in other areas that we have high, or unique situations that need to be met.
So could I ask how many people or positions are affected by this request?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Mr. Collins?
I'm sorry. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'll get
The
closer
last
to the
part
mic.
I missed.
How many positions are we talking about?
We're looking at estimated number for the CLAD is 10, bilingual authorization 3, resource specialist 4, teacher librarian services 3, and then for a limited assignment permit, multiple subject, the estimated number needed is 2, single subject 5, special education 5.
Okay, and the special ed, at least my reading of the item, is it entirely covered by people who are qualified in mild moderate being asked to teach mod severe or vice versa? Is that what we're talking about?
To be honest, I'd have to go back and research that to give you specifically exact information on that. I can provide that to the board.
Okay, I'm prepared to vote for the item as presented, but I would like to get that information. So if you could
Absolutely.
follow up
Thank you.
afterwards, that would be great. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I move we approve this item as presented.
Second.
Okay, so moved by Dr. DeBrienza, seconded by Mr. Collins.
Ms. Vladimir,
Aye.
Mr. Collins,
Aye.
Dr. DeBrienza,
Aye.
Mr. Dauber,
Aye.
Mr. Drop.
Aye. Okay. Now we're moving on to action items. Our first action item, 5A, the Every Student Reads Initiative.
Okay, we believe this item coming back for the second time should be relatively quick. We took the feedback from last time from the board, and I believe Ms. Brown and the team have incorporated all of that into the new item. So Ms. Brown, why don't you touch on this quickly?
Thank you, Dr. Austin. Yes, we have taken your feedback and we've added it to our items. You can notice them, the additions, we added a goal just around ELA. And to every, not a goal, I'm sorry, a progress indicator. And to every progress indicator, we added students with disabilities. And to the BAS, we added SED, student with disabilities, and EL. It'll be all EL. We don't yet have the ability to pull out those enrolled in a US school 12 plus months, but those are the additions. And so tonight we are asking that you approve our progress indicators for the Every Student Reads initiatives.
Thank you. We have one member of the public who wishes to comment. You'll have 3 minutes. Terry Baldwin, PAEA President.
Great, thank you. I'm really just here to speak about the use of the SBAC being used as the 2 main criteria for this initiative. One reason that the SBAC test is not the best assessment tool is because, like all high stakes tests, it is not an accurate measure of student achievement. Teachers who spend the entire year assessing students are much more accurate predictors of student achievement than any single high stakes test. The teachers' formative assessments and observations will give more accurate reading levels than a high stakes standardized test will. The Hoover Institute found the SBAC is a biased, language-heavy test that discriminates against English learners. Standardized tests have never been accurate and reliable measures of student learning. Since their inception, these high stakes tests have been instruments of racism and bias in a biased system. Decades of research demonstrate that BIPOC students experience bias from standardized tests administered from early childhood through college. We are focusing on equity in our educational system, yet these standardized tests are inherently biased. The Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center at Boston University stated, "Standardized tests have become the most effective racist weapon ever devised to objectively degrade Black and Brown minds and legally exclude their bodies from prestigious schools." Linda Darling Hammond would say, "When we only focus on a test achievement, we're drawing attention away from teaching and learning." The SBAC is a multiple choice test that will not assess how students read to become critical thinkers and use text to support theory. The BAS does this. You can measure comprehension as well as decoding and reading with accuracy, and not just regurgitating information without necessarily using critical thinking skills. If we're going to measure our students' success, we need to use the assessments our teachers give to determine the level at which a student is reading and comprehending. The classroom teacher also sees the amount of growth a student makes within a school year. So please reassess this plan and not use the SBAC, but use our own district assessments that teachers use in their classrooms, such as the BAS. And just remember, students aren't standardized, but these tests are. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, Dr. DiBrienza.
Thanks. I'd like to first start by addressing some of what Ms. Baldwin said, because while I so appreciate that she brought up what is problematic about standardized tests generally, and what is concerning about these tests, and yet I will tell you that I support these being our indicators, because this is how we are judged by the state. We have an obligation to, I am happy to go up to Sacramento and continue to advocate to change for what those tests are. But right now, this is how we're judged. And we have a responsibility to support students in meeting those standards in any way we can. And it's one of the reasons why I think it's very important that the BAS indicator stay as an indicator, so that we can look at our own teaching and our own instructors and see what they think. What is interesting to note, and might give some confidence to some of our concerned community members, is that several years ago I inquired about the correlation between these two exams, and is one predictive of the other, and are they close? And what we found out by looking at them is that they are pretty close, that usually, not in every case, but usually students who are at or above standard in one are at or above standard in the other. And a student who is below standard in one is usually below standard in another. So they do seem quite aligned with each other. But either way, we are obligated to, we are judged on this. It is on the dashboard. We have an obligation to reach that standard. So I am going to support all three of these. I think that it's going to help us get a better picture of all students when we look at all three of these. And if we start to see one of them going up a lot more than the other, I think that just poses new questions for us, right? Why is that? Is one a better measure, or are we missing, is one missing something? Or I think it'll be an opportunity. The one other thing I just wanted to say about this is that some of these numbers are really low. So while I know we're not going to jump, 20% every year or anything, I do hope that, this 5% is the minimum that we do. And I hope that if one year we see ourselves jump 10%, then the next year we're still going to do 5% above that, right? We haven't reached our goal for the next year. It's each year we're going to reevaluate and do 5% from the new level, right? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dauber, I think your hand's raised.
Thank you, and thanks for modifying the progress indicators to add the SBAC ELA indicator, which gives us the ability to measure students who are at or above standard, which I think accurately reflects, I think, at least a lot of folks' interest in terms of goals. I'm completely comfortable with the SBAC test. I think it's hard to imagine that we would actually do better for students without seeing an increase in the SBAC. And I think that the relatively low score that we see on the SBAC for students reflects our actual success in teaching those students. So I
I hope and expect that we're going to see an increase in that, and that's going to represent real value for students. I'll leave it at that. I had a couple of clarifying questions. When we talk about a percentage increase, I'm assuming, but I just wanted to clarify so that everybody understands. So we're talking about a percentage point increase, not literally a percent increase. So, for example, you know, that 3% increase would mean that we would go from, say, 62% to 65% rather than 3% of 62%. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. That's what I figured, but I just wanted to make it clear because I didn't find the language in the report completely clear. I would like to get a little bit of an understanding about how these goals were chosen. That is, why 3%, 4%, and 5% rather than 5%, 6%, and 7%, or some other set of numbers. Can you provide some of your rationale around the particular targets that you've proposed?
So we wanted to make sure that we, first of all, met the goal. But the reason we went 3, 4, 5 and not 5, 4, 3 was that we figured the children next year will have 1 year with our initiative in place. So we're doing just the 1 year. The class after that will have 2 years. So we expect a greater increase. And the class after that will have 3 years and so on. So we wanted to be clear that we know that this is 1 year. The children that take it next year will only have had 1 year of our focused efforts.
Do you, now obviously our goals go to 23-24 school year. Mm-hmm. Do you expect these gains to continue? In other words, if I were sitting here, which I won't be, but if I were 3 years from now, and we were talking about what these goals look like for, 24, 25, and so on, mm-hmm. Do you expect that those would continue to rise at a similar rate, or what is your projection about this?
Yes, we want them to rise. So here, the thing is that these are a different group of students each year. So as we get better in our implementation, we expect that the 3rd grade will continue to rise. Our goal is obviously to go above what we have put here, 71, 65. We want to get up as high as we can. We want to get everyone to benchmark. That is our goal.
So what we're saying is that for the 23-24 school year for SED students for the ELA, we're going to be at 41% at or above grade level.
Yes.
And eventually we hope to get to 100% at or above grade level. I'm asking you. Yeah, I understand. I'm asking you to speculate a little bit. Would you expect that 5% a year gain to continue after that? Because by my math, it would take another dozen years to get to 100%, or let's choose let's say 80%. Would take another, what would that be, 8 years, right? Is that generally what you would expect looking forward? What is your sense about that?
My feeling is that as we move along, we're probably going to have to adjust these goals. We might need to, as Dr. DeBrianza said, if we hit 10% this first year, we're still going to go for 5% the next year. But, as we move along, we will have to adjust these. And you should also know that these numbers, children can be duplicated in each of these boxes. So we're hopeful that, we will be raising everybody's score up. So we should see all these groups go up together. And I'm also very confident that we will continue to rise them up as high as we can go. And we are not going to stop until we have everybody at grade level.
So let me just ask one more question here. So these aren't cumulative goals with some intermediate milestones expected. In other words, if you see, for example, a 5% increase next year, you would still expect to see a 4 percentage point increase above that the following year. That's the goal that we would still have.
Yes.
In other words, we're not going to say, okay, we're looking for whatever that is, 12% over 3 years. If we get that in 2 years, we're done. We're still going to have a 5% goal for that last year. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Collins?
Thanks. Thanks for bringing this back. I appreciate staff's, using their judgment to amend what was there before. It seems responsive to what the board was looking for. I guess my point. Hang on, I moved off the screen. Now there we go. That's what you get for having too many screens going. My concern is looking at the second indicator for SBAC ELA for SED and Black or African American students, in that given that we are starting at such a low level, 29% for SED and 23% for Black or African American, I don't feel comfortable with the same relatively slow progression. In other words, if we're doing such a poor job with these kids today, we ought to be able to make more progress initially than with kids that we're already doing a pretty good job with, as in some of the other groups and as in some of the other groups. So in particular, I'd like to see all the groups get to 50% or higher by the 23-24 year. And I don't care that much how you stair step it. But the idea that after 4 years of working really hard, Black or African American students would be at 35% grade level and we would consider that a success does not sit well with me. So I propose that you guys modify that so that every one of those categories is at 50% or above in the fourth year, in the last year on the schedule. And Dr. Austin, I don't know if you want to, or Ms. Brown, if you want to give feedback on that, I'd be happy to hear it.
There are a couple things. We did some internal work looking at what the percentages, I think Mr. Dauber asked a question last time that I was really interested in, which is, do these increases really make a difference in the overall performance? And Mr. Moore, correct me if I'm way off on this, but what we looked at, when we had that comparative list, which did not make it into the final indicators of about 300 or so schools, the growth that we're proposing would put us in the top 3. Now, again, assuming that the others maintained their performance levels, it put us in the top 50. So that answers a resounding yes. It's a significant move. In fact, if we would have gone on that list and said, let's move up to the top 50, we probably would have said that's pretty darn aggressive. But that's what these numbers did. Now, that again was SED Hispanic subgroup, and you're asking a little different question here. So I think we can amend anything, but it's a significant departure from the direction from last time. So I need to hear that from the board if we're going to make that move. But I understand what you're saying. So I think we're in agreement on the concept, but it's such a significant change that we need to hear from everybody.
Well, if I can just add a little bit, I happen to have, just so happen to have the ranked list of schools for African American students. And I know that the top ranked school for African Americans, district for African American students for third grade ELA is Clovis Unified. And they're at 62%. And our target of, what was it, 35? Would put us at about the 40th percentile, where the first percentile is the best and the 100th is the worst. So a little bit above halfway, which I think, speaks volume about what a terrible job we do in California teaching African-American students as well as other low-income students. Well, to the extent these, my group is just low-income African-American students, so just to be quite clear about that. But I do think, I just don't feel comfortable with the 35. So if you need to hear that from the board, then I guess we can have further discussion about it.
Okay, Dr. DiBrienza.
My board colleague, Mr. Collins, likes to say, let's underpromise and overdeliver. I don't think that any of you have any impression that we'll be happy with little tiny baby steps along the way. I think that making this a priority and stressing how important it is, how big it is, and that there's really nothing more important. But the idea of trying to do something outrageous when we're just starting this, we don't know what we're going to see. As I said in my comment, I hope we're going to see more than what is here. But I think that we should make some realistic goals and try to blow past them. But if you guys make percentage goals that we have not moved in decades, I don't want to set us up where that's a failure. I want us to do the work and to make big goals, but I don't know what's reasonable yet. So predicting, creating indicators that will take us further than we have been by lots in decades, I think is a good starting place. And if you blow past that, yay, do it. But I think under-promising and over-delivering right now would be a great thing to do in the coming year.
Other comments, colleagues? Ken, Mr. Dauber, sorry.
Well, under-promising can also lead to under-delivering, which is what it usually does. So, but I'm interested actually in a question that I asked in the last round, but I'm not sure I got a complete answer to. But Mr. Collins' suggestion kind of puts a fine point on it, which is let's take a look at the African American target for 23-24 of 35%. Does that target represent the best that you think can reasonably be done? In other words, if we set a target of 50%, would we be setting a target that we really expect not to be able to meet? In other words, am I looking at the best that we can reasonably hope to do? Am I looking at a little bit less than what we can reasonably expect to do because you're trying to over-deliver? How should I interpret these? Why these goals, I guess?
I want to take that one, but first I'm going to make fun of myself for a second because I was mouthing to Ann that I would take it while wearing a mask. So, it's been a year and a half, and we're still doing those things. Now, great question, and I'm going to answer. This is not an excuse. These are considerations. We think we are going to make gains next year. We are going to make gains next year. And we're doing that with renewed focus, plugging in OG strategies. We think that those two things, this renewed focus, it's going to be a huge focus, which we're going to work on June 10th with our principals. Every elementary teacher going through 30 hours of targeted professional development. That's going to make a jump. But we also have a couple other things competing with that. Later tonight, we're going to have an agenda item where we're going to talk about doing a full adoption. That adoption may or may not land in something similar, exactly the same, or something very different than what we're currently using. So as we're looking at factors, variables, we're adding a significant variable, which would mean an implementation just a year out of something that could be very different. Again, who knows what it's going to be, but it's going to be something different. It's not going to be identical. So I'd be very surprised if it's just absolutely identical. So I'd be cautious. There's a chance we're going to exceed. Ms. Reynolds, who's on with us right now, can piggyback on this one also, but we've had some really good success in some very specific small target areas this year. Hard to predict with those additional variables where we're going to land. On top of the fact, if we're going to be real honest here, and we're talking about the test, how they're going to recalibrate in the state of California, I think our closure program was probably better than a lot of school districts across the state. Whether that meant that we came back earlier, had more in-person instruction, or we just had better resources and a teaching force that was able to deliver differently than a lot of places across the state of California. I don't know how that's going to impact this kind of relative positioning, but Ms. Reynolds, I have probably exceeded about as far as I should go on reading expertise. So why don't you jump in here?
So, as I'm listening to you talk a little bit about this, I agree with you that obviously we want all of the students that we're looking at for the Every Student Reads initiative to be reading on or above grade level, right? Whether it's the benchmark assessment or the SBAC assessment. And so we're going to be working collectively as an elementary team, teachers, principals, together to move that needle, to really grow our readers. And I need to get into the role. I need to get into all of the schools. I need to work with my colleagues to figure out what that is going to include. We know we've got OG coming on board. Teachers are actually getting trained this week. We started the training. So we're building our foundation in phonics. That's going to really provide some additional support, really strong foundation for our students. We've got the benchmark assessment, calibration, and training happening. That's going to bolster what our teachers will be able to provide in terms of their instructional practice for their students once they are able to assess them and have a better understanding of what the children need moving forward. Just looking at how many African-American third graders were actually assessed, there were 19 children. So we can figure out who we're talking about and really have some specific work that we're doing across the district together with the kids that we're thinking about and needing to address specifically, right? So there are a lot of pieces, but if we're also going to add adoption, that's going to shift things for all of us. So that's going to shift things for teachers, and we want to make sure that we're headed in the right direction in terms of keeping the teachers laser focused on instructional practice and growing their practice and supporting the students in these groups that we know we need to move, and making sure we're getting these children to grade level, and making sure that we're looking at our SBAC interim assessments, administering those, getting children familiar with those, utilizing those interim assessments, and getting information based on those interim assessments. Just helping students become more and more familiar with that will support how they're actually going to perform when they're taking that high stakes test that Terry talked about. So all of those pieces, those are just some things, thinking about it from my principal hat right now, but thinking about being in the role next year and being able to support all 12 of the elementary principals that have K-5 sites where kids are taking the SBAC in grades 3 through 5, what we're going to need to do to support them. But thinking about it now, but knowing if we're adding on ELA, that's going to shift things. The other thing we might want to also think about with this data is just how the test changes over time and what that has looked like over time for our students as well. So a lot of work ahead, and absolutely we want to grow these scores. They shouldn't be this low, and this is a decades-long issue, and we can't solve it all in 3 years, but we will solve it. it has to change. And it can change. We just have to have the will and put our resources around this initiative.
So I appreciate that. So let me see if I can sort of provide what I'm understanding is behind the proposal, and then maybe test a possible direction. It sounds to me like there's a fair amount of uncertainty around what the right targets are, because we don't really have a good sense at this point in the process, of what is possible and what we can expect. So we want to avoid over promising, full stop. That makes sense. On the other hand, I do want to make sure that we don't underpromise today about a target that we're 3 years from now. So what I think might help to bridge that gap is to revisit these goals after we get some experience and have some more basis for creating targets. And maybe the right time to do that is a year from now, when we see, how we did, and also, get some more experience with the sort of techniques that we're deploying against this. I think in general, and so I'll make that suggestion. Colleagues can respond to it. I can make a motion as well. I think it's probably worth doing that since we're talking about something that's going to happen a year from now. I think in general, as we go through these kinds of goal setting exercises, which I think is great. I think this is exactly what we should be doing, but I think it would be really useful to have a sort of an explicit description from staff about how you've set the goals that you're proposing, so that we have some context for understanding, are these the right goals, or does this reflect a lot of uncertainty, or does it reflect a pretty clear sense about what's possible? And that will help us, I think, to evaluate, how we think about them. So that's more of a process request to staff. But my proposal, I guess, would be to revisit these goals, to adopt these goals, but to revisit them a year from now, with the hope that we'll be able to increase them once we have more experience with how we're doing.
Dr. Austin,
And yeah.
Now, Mr. Dauber, would you like to propose an amendment to the motion, or simply have us direct staff to do that?
I mean, I guess we're going to be adopting this, so I'll move to, let me move that we approve these process indicators as presented, with the change that we, in addition, direct staff to return no later than June 1st of next year with revised targets to reflect the experience of the next year, and rationales around the revisions.
Can I second it so I can then ask a question? I'll second that. But I'm wondering if June 1st makes any sense. I mean, you guys you do your end of year assessments like at the end of May. Is there a date that makes sense?
I mean, yeah, you tell me if that staff can say, that's crazy. We won't have the numbers.
That's crazy.
We won't. I didn't mean literally call them crazy.
But the mask, it's the mask.
I didn't say that. Yeah, we'll need either the later in June or at the end of June. Like right now, we got it. We just crunched the numbers last week, so we would need more time than June.
So by the second
meeting. Let's say by July.
The second meeting in June would be great.
By the end of June 2022. Yeah, 2022.
So I already seconded that motion, so do we have to amend it again?
I think it's
Draw
fine.
that motion?
I think friendly clarification by Mr. Dauber.
Okay.
No later than the last meeting in June. Okay.
Great. I'm still seconding it.
That's right.
Oh,
Sorry, Ms. Latimerek.
Can I make comments?
Yeah, please.
So I actually have a couple comments, but that can sort of incorporate everything we've been talking about. I first just sort of want to follow up on the point that I think Ms. DiBrienza made. I think everybody's made this point. These numbers that we're looking at haven't moved in half a century. I love this literacy initiative, and if you don't know by now, I'm a raving fan of Ms. Reynolds and have expectations that are likely bordering on unrealistic for her and her team. But I am feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time in a long time about our ability to move the needle on closing the opportunity gap. But I just want to make sure to say that the way we teach reading is not the only reason that I believe Mrs. Reynolds said 19 third grade Black students' scores were so low. Their math scores are low too. All right, so there's more going on here, and changing, just sort of raising the percentage improvement that we are expecting from staff isn't going to do the work that has to be done to raise the percentage. So this sort of connects to a comment that I wanted to make about metrics, just following up again on Ms. DiBrienza and Ms. Baldwin, and point out that there are many opinions on what the best measures are. For example, I know there's a lot of people in the special ed community who are concerned that BAS also is not a good measurement for certain students and certain struggling readers. And I know staff discussed the measures at length and decided on BAS and CASP, and I'm certainly not a literacy expert, and I'm not going to second guess that analysis. But connected to the fact that we're still developing the specifics of this initiative, we're going to be looking at how the TC units of study and OG strategies fit together and aligning best practices, and then next year we're going to go through a curriculum adoption process. So what I would ask, and maybe I don't need to make an amendment like Mr. Dauber, but I would ask that as you get deeper into that process of implementing the initiative, reaching out to other districts, analyzing best practices, aligning, going through curriculum adoption, if you determine that there is another metric that should also be considered, maybe you could bring that back at the same time for us to discuss, because obviously, we want to decide on a measure of success. We don't want to keep moving the goalposts, but what our goal really is to teach kids to read, right? And so if there's a way to measure that more accurately, then please don't hesitate to bring that back also, since it looks like we're going to be looking at this in a year anyways. I'm done.
All right. Mr. Dauber and Mr. Collins, when you have questions, would you mind raising your physical hand, because I can't see the icon from here. Mr. Collins.
Thanks for that heads up. I'll note it. This is a good discussion, so I really appreciate the thoughtfulness, and I just wanted to underscore. Ms. Dr. DiBrienza is absolutely correct. I do very often say that we should underpromise and overdeliver. I thought Mr. Dauber made a good point too, that we often underpromise and underdeliver. All of us do. So underpromising doesn't necessarily help you overdeliver. I do feel, Ms. Reynolds said there were 19 kids. I just feel if we can't teach 10 kids to read, then I mean, we're a $275 million district that thinks it's the best district in California. And if you're telling me we can't get 10 kids to grade level, if we make it a priority, then I bet you can. So I guess it sounds like we're going to have a vote on this, but I'm going to stick to 50% as sort of the threshold that I'm looking for. And so I'm gonna support that, and regardless of what we write down in this, I'll definitely be looking for that kind of result. That's what I'll be looking for as a result of this initiative, and I bet we can do it.
All right, colleagues, any other questions, or should we vote on the amendment? Okay, So the amendment, again, was to direct staff to return no later than the last meeting in June with revised targets based on staff's experience over the year and with the rationale behind them. And it was moved by Mr. Dauber, seconded by Dr. DiBrienza.
Okay. Dr. DiBrienza.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Since it doesn't contradict what I just said, I was sticking my stake in the ground. I also vote aye.
Okay. Ms. Latimerich.
Aye.
Mr. Dauber.
Well, I'm going to vote aye. I do want to echo Mr. Collins. One of the reasons I'd like to wait a year is I'd like you to come back with a more ambitious target than what we have here, and I think you will once you've got that experience. So I'm going to accept these at this point, but I am looking for higher targets once you've got some basis for doing that. Aye.
Mr. Drop.
Aye. Okay, and now on to the actual motion. It sounds like all board members have very high expectations, staff, so please take that into account.
Mr.
Okay.
Durop?
Yes.
In terms of process, I moved the motion with that. My motion was for the this recommendation with that change. So I just voted for the whole thing. It's fine. If it would cause confusion not to vote again, I think that's fine. But that was the burden of my original motion.
Okay. Let me look at my colleagues to make sure that was their understanding as well. I'm getting thumbs up.
We passed the whole thing.
If that was the understanding when taking the vote.
Yeah, because he proposed that we pass it with this amendment.
Great. Okay, so that has been passed. All right, and I got confirmation from Vicky. Thank you, Mr. Dauber, for pointing that out. All right, let's move on to item 5B, which is award of a contract for the construction of the Briones OH wing roofing replacement project.
Okay, I believe this is Dr. Golden. We're getting him in right now.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Dr. Golden.
Let's see, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. So this is a simple construction item. The award of a contract for roof repair. As far as there's been no elaborate community meetings and the like. All people want is a roof that performs properly. This is kind of consistent with past results in that we have a number of recent past results and that we have a number of bids. That's encouraging. But this result is remarkable because we had estimated this project as at $820,000. We had a bid of $1 million. We had a couple of bids at $800,000. We had a bid of $653,000, but then we had a bid of $427,000. This contractor is standing by its bid. We have checked their references. We found them satisfactory. Actually, it's interesting because a couple of the references have said they're constantly getting questions about this contractor. Two things: how does the contractor perform? Answer: very satisfactory. And so is this common that their bids are low? And the answer is yes. So we have no basis for. They're based in Pleasanton. We have nothing, no recommendation other than simply to award the bid to this contractor.
Thank you, Dr. Golden. We do have one member of the public who wishes to comment. Comment will be 3 minutes. Rebecca Eisenberg, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. With respect to Dr. Golden, I've been in the business of negotiating contractor and employment contracts for 30 years. And it's my firm, unwavering belief that you get what you pay for, at least most of the time. Roofing is not an area where it's wise to cut corners and penny pinch. This is $500,000 contract on roofers. That for a project estimated at more than $800,000. Why are roofers generally expensive? Roofers are usually expensive because good, dependable roofers need to have a lot of insurance. They need to have extremely well-trained employees, and they need to have a lot of safety mechanisms in place in case something goes wrong. Well, most of the time things don't go wrong, and I'm sure that's why there were lots of good references. The truth is that when you have a roofer that isn't properly trained, insured, or with appropriate safety protocols, in the unlikely event of something going wrong, you have a much, much, much bigger problem. The difference, it didn't take me long to find out that the difference between the firm that you all chose and the others on that list is that that is the only firm that does not use unionized labor. It's the only firm that is not listed, at least as a member of the very strong and well-respected Roofers Union, locally and of course nationally. Why use unionized roofers? Well, as I told you, they're more likely to be better trained. They're more likely to have better benefits and better pay, which means that they, unlike the PAUSD, don't have problems with recruiting the best employees or retaining the best employees. They're required to have the best insurance. They are required to have the best safety mechanisms. Plus, using unionized labor is a value that I thought our school district really reflected. Another thought, so, I do not support, although I imagine you're going to approve this anyway, the acceptance of the lowest bid of the only non-unionized shop to the detriment of all the unionized shops. One other thing, you all just worked so hard wringing your hands about the lack of equity in this district. What many other districts, and I agree with you, but what many other districts are doing is that they're working harder to actually use minority-owned and women-owned businesses, especially local businesses. We know that a lot of the lack of equity is due to historic discrimination that's reflected in current and historic income disparities. Using minority-owned local businesses is a great way to make your job easier to teach kids who are minorities, because they won't have bigger gaps. Thank you so much. Please consider.
Thank you. All right, board colleagues, do we have any comments? Just wait a beat to see the, okay. All right, Mr. Collins.
Dr. Golden, what's our policy on using union labor?
Let me turn this over to Tom Hodges. Tom, why don't you make that response?
Sure. We don't require union labor, but we do require that any contractor on our jobs pay prevailing wage. So there is no advantage to non-union versus union as far as cost. Other than that, I can't speak to anything else.
Thank you. That answers my question. Appreciate it.
Is there a motion?
I move we approve the item as presented.
Second.
Okay, so moved by Dr. DeBrienza, seconded by Mr. Collins.
All right, Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Vladimiric.
Aye.
Dr. DeBrienza.
Aye.
Mr. Dauber.
Aye.
Mr. Drop.
Aye. Okay, next we move on to item 5C, third amendment to the employment agreement for the superintendent.
We've asked our general counsel, Ms. Fishakin, to take this item.
Thank you, Dr. Austin. This is an amendment to the superintendent's contract. As directed by the board, additional terms were included regarding superintendent's contract extension. The terms are outlined in the board documents. I will just read it out for convenience. Beginning with 2020-21 evaluation. If the superintendent receives a satisfactory evaluation, the term of the superintendent's agreement shall be extended by 1 additional year, so long as the agreement never exceeds 4 years without further board action. This language is consistent with the language that's used with the past superintendent contracts. It is recommended the board waive the 2-meeting rule and approve the third amendment to the superintendent's contract.
Okay. Colleagues, do we have comments or should we, there are two motions here, as Ms. Majekin said, waiver of the two-meeting rule and the actual item. So if there are no,
I move that we waive the 2-meeting rule for this item.
Second.
okay, so moved by Mr. Dauber, seconded by Dr. DiBrienza.
Dr. DiBrienza,
Aye.
Mr. Collins,
Aye.
Slatomeric,
Aye.
Mr. Dauber,
Aye.
Mr. Drop.
Aye. Okay. Now, before we get to the actual actual item, we should take public comment, and we do have some members of the public who wish to speak. 2 members, you'll each have 3 minutes. Actually, sorry, 1 member. Rebecca Eisenberg, Ms. Eisenberg, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, so as you heard me say, I negotiate contracts for a living, and these days, almost all of my work is employment contracts. So I'm going to tell you what this employment contract says, and then when you approve it, maybe you'd be approving this. So this employment contract says that, and with with the due respect to the person who wrote it, whatever that respect is actually due, this said that the term of the superintendent's agreement shall be extended by 1 additional year so long as the agreement never extends 4 years. Agreements don't extend any period of time. That's a and not only is that ambiguous, it's actually an impossibility. Agreements don't have lengths of times. I think what the author who wrote this meant is the term of the contract doesn't exceed 4 years. So what you're really then approving is that the superintendent's term of employment will be ending, I guess, after the 4th year. So that sounds good. Because the previous amendments, as some of you weren't aware, first extended the superintendent for an additional 2 years and then extended him for additional 3 years, which was a truly unprecedented move, especially in a time when there's so many superintendents on the market, given all the layoffs and the bad economy. So what this actually says, the way it's written, what it says is that the superintendent, what the contract that before had been extended 2, 3, or 4 additional years now actually is being extended only 1 year at a time, as long as the term of his original employment, which was originally set for maximum 7 years, doesn't exceed 4 years. That's what it says. So I'll be looking forward to you approving that, because I never thought it was actually okay for you to have approved so many years in advance, which took away, which first of all is completely, utterly unprecedented in the field, no matter what the superintendent may say, no matter how he may rationalize and claim he knows about how other superintendents are hired. It's just not true. What he's saying is not true. It is just not done to have a superintendent hired, given a contract for 3 years into the future. That is just not done, especially not in this economy. So this should actually, the way it's written, assuming that agreement term is what was meant, and even if even just keeping an agreement, what it really means is that it will be ending his employment shortly. If you meant something else, the other only possible thing that you may have meant is to allow his contract to continue to extend without having public board approval. But you couldn't have meant that, could you have? Because
Thank you. All right, colleagues, comments?
Mr. Durop, I move that we approve the 3rd amendment to the superintendent's contract as presented.
Okay, so moved by Mr. Dauber. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, seconded by Ms. Slatomeric. Dr. Austin, will you take the roll?
Yes, Mr. Collins,
Sorry, I had to unmute. Aye.
Dr. DiBrienza,
Aye.
Ms. Slatomeric,
Aye.
Mr. Dauber,
Aye.
Mr. Drop.
Aye. Okay, moving on to discussion items. Now, these items are not for action. They are on just for discussion. First up, item, what is this? Sorry, item 6A. We are going to gavel in a public hearing. The board is going to conduct a public hearing on this item prior to discussion. and then we'll have the discussion. So we're hereby convening a public hearing on item 6A, local control accountability plan, annual update, learning continuity attendance plan, and 2021-24 LCAP.
Thank you. I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Ofek to introduce our presenter tonight.
Thank you. This evening, you will hear about the LCAP annual update for the 1920 school year, the LCP update for the 2021 school year, and the new LCAP plan for the 21 through 24 school year. As a reminder, the LCAP or the LCP is the temporary LCAP that was created by the state in response to COVID. Tonight, Dr. Argumedo, for the last time in many, many years, 10 years, I think, or as long as the LCAP's been alive in PAUSD, she will share the highlights of these 3 specific plans. However, we also want the board and the community to know that we worked diligently as a team here at the district to capture all of the PAUSD goals and initiatives across these 3 plans, as well as the ELO and the CSACE, both of which you have already seen and approved earlier in this last couple months. Making sure that the actions in each of these accountability plans didn't overlap was at times challenging, but that is what we have accomplished, we believe. And so I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Argumedo so you can hear what we have in each of these annual updates and new goals for the coming LCAP.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ms. Ofek. So as Ms. Ofek stated, we worked really hard this year as a team to have over 5 plans not be repetitive. So we have covered every single aspect for PAUSD in the 3 plans. And I'm going to quickly and very comprehensively go over all the 3 plans. The LCAP annual update, unfortunately, in March of 2020, as we were getting ready to roll out our annual update and update our plan, the plan was paused due to the pandemic. And so our dashboard was not updated. Many of our assessments were put on pause. And so the state kind of said that they would let us know what we would be doing for the fall. However, in the middle of this process, our team did have the foresight to continue community meetings. So we did have community meetings. We did get feedback before we got the LCP, which is the Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan. So we still gathered feedback knowing that we were going to have to do something. In the interim, they told us that the LCAP will resume for 21-24, and we have that plan at the end. Our transition plan was the LCP, and it actually is LCAP, but it was so confusing, we took out the A. So we call it internally the LCP. That is what I called the COVID plan, how we were going to address the learning in distance and in person. And really the focus of that plan was to inform the state, county, and the public of our plans going forward. We had our first meeting in September. I'm going to talk a little bit more about all the stakeholder meetings. And we included every single item what we were going to do. They wanted our safety plan. They wanted to know how we were going to deliver lunches, how we were going to provide hotspots. And that was a plan that we came up with extensive feedback from stakeholders. The LCAP, the new one, 21-24, it's a brand new template. So we all had to learn how to do this plan all over again, fresh. And the template is easier. So it was a hard year this year, but going forward, it's going to be a new year. And the entire team learned it as I transition out. I'm very confident that the team will move forward. We went through it together as a team for 2 hours sometimes, very long meetings. We received lots of input. And what we did is we learned from COVID and the LCP how to move forward and create better stakeholder. I will say one of the things we did learn is the Zoom did offer the opportunity for more people to participate because translation was easier. People didn't have to come to the district office. And so we hope to include that moving forward.
Thank you.
Oh, I was like, I
thought you were looking at me for.
I could be done. I'll try to go faster through this slide.
No.
So our stakeholder engagement, as I alluded to, we had many community meetings with our DLAC, which is our District English Language Acquisition Committee, and our District Advisory Committee principals. I met with the unions, PAEA and CSEA, and I went to several site councils to get input. And surveys, we had surveys sent out to parents and staff, and actually Thomas Lee, the board member, told me how I could get students to actually reply to the surveys. He told me to do it through the self class at Gunn and through the teacher advisory. So we had over 600 student responses. They were the best responses I ever got. Some of them told me my questions made no sense, and that they didn't like my scale, and we changed it in real time. So and I would say the Ed Services team really looked at the student feedback on how they could learn what they needed, and a lot of our goals reflect that. So the LCP and the annual update in the plan, it's much shorter. We talk about our in-person learning that began in October, and our secondary beginning in March. However, PAUSD Plus is highlighted because that also started in October, and we did get a lot of feedback from the state that we were one of the only districts who did move forward with that. And during the stakeholder meetings, that was something that was always highly praised for our district and our board to have the foresight to open up early. The distance learning, hotspots, devices, all the professional learning, the summer professional learning was outstanding, and our teachers really learned a lot on how to provide lessons through the online platform. Targeted student support, I talked about, and then the mental health, that was a focus. We also had mental health for staff. The professional learning department had mental health modules for classified and for certificated, and we worked with HR to provide that. Some of the highlights from the new 21-24 LCAP. We talked a lot about that already, so I'm just going to quickly just say that early literacy is one of the things that our team worked on, and I think we delved into that a lot. And so that is one of our LCAP goals that we're really proud of and that we're going to move forward, and it's supported by lots of different departments. One of the things in the LCAP that we highlighted was equity. Palo Alto does have a foundation of equity, but we have went on to expand what that means. It's more targeted. It's across multiple departments. We're working together. And our equity goals are really related to problems we see in our educational system. For one example is suspension. So our equity, I think, is now providing staff different entry points. Equity for secondary is going to look very different for equity from elementary because there are different issues. And I think that as we expand our equity trainings, it's going to reflect that. And then it's also very evident because we do now have an equity department, which, if people know, came from the MATD many years ago. Additional supports. Those are in other plans, but we did highlight summer school. We've expanded to have a wellness center. We've offered everybody enrichment opportunities, so it's not just intervention. Credit recovery has been expanded. We really are focusing on getting EL students and McKinney-Vento the supports they need to be successful. And wellness, I will say that our SAFE specialists, which I'm going to talk a little bit later, really helped alert staff when students weren't okay. Our wellness center, I worked personally very deeply with Genevieve Dixon at Gunn High School, and the reach out for students who are not doing well is highlighted for our 21-24, and also to do some preventative work with social emotional learning. And one of our last highlights before I go to questions was our homeschool connection. Our SAFE specialists were essential in many ways, providing registration for summer school, giving extra support to families, letting us know who needed Wi-Fi, who needed hotspots, who needed Chrome devices, and we were really able to provide access to students at home, whether it was delivering meals or delivering supplies. So that was very essential, and that's something we're going to move forward with in our LCAP. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'm here for questions.
Thank you. Before we get to questions, we're going to continue with the hearing and take public comment. We have 3 members of the public who wish to speak to this. You'll each have 3 minutes. Edith Cohen, Arabi, and Jeff Weiner.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, so we keep hearing these discussions about LCAP and equity, and like many others, I'm disappointed with PAUSD's inability to elevate the student that need it most. And I'm also at the same time puzzled with the steps supposedly taken to remedy that, including the delaying, the obstructive placement of those wanting to advance. And I feel that we need more discussion on transparency of what are our guiding principles here. One thing I feel is missing is respect for families. We're a very diverse community, a global village, and we have different perspectives of choices and passions, and PAUSD sets limits and policies that actually show distrust of families and their values, and limit their abilities to make choices. And this is a huge issue because there's nothing more damaging that a school can do to harm the wellness of kids than just dismissing the values that they come from home. And we've seen an example of that actually in that board meeting today. The last speakers were few adults simply dismiss the priorities and passions of others. How can possibly someone like math? And they use it with biased anecdotes, with shaming, and with unsupported perceptions. And I feel it's like in line with what the district and the leadership had been doing. And this is something we need to correct. So I'm not asking you to adopt or even understand the choices that I'm making, that other families are making, but I do insist that you just respect them. Because respect is important and it's critical to provide a supporting and healthy environment for all our kids. Every parent sending the kid to school need to know that the school does not contradict or shame them for what they get at home. Second is that we need some discussion on premises underlying policies. It seems like some concept is used that equity and excellence oppose each other, and learning is a zero-sum game. So PAUSD failed to elevate few students, and the response is to obstruct all others. And this needs to be discussed because I feel it's not right. I feel you can elevate all students to their potential without obstructing anybody, and creating an environment of excellence would help everybody reach their potential. And finally, there is a narrative here that for years have been going on at PAUSD that wellness is against excellence and hard work. So it's like we need to limit homework in advanced courses, and we need to limit courses that some students can handle a higher workload, but it needs to be limited because families cannot be trusted and because it's against their wellness. And actually,
thank you. And please email your comments to board@pausd.org. Next is Arabi and then Jeff Weiner.
Hi, the PAUSD promise for high quality teaching and learning is to ensure that all education stakeholders are responsible for every learner, having full access to quality education, challenging curriculum, full opportunity to learn, and appropriate sufficient support for learning so they can achieve at excellent levels in academic and other student outcomes. My concern is how is and learning going to be achieved in a heterogeneous math class in the middle schools. Again, I'm a math educator, so I'm passionate about teaching math to kids and uplifting them and having them succeed in this school. Can you hear me? Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
I have been a math educator for the last 20 years now and know firsthand that it's really difficult for a teacher to teach multi-ability kids in the same class. And we already have lanes, so you might think that's a moot point. We PAUSD parents would like to know if middle school math teachers will be assisted in classes by at least one substitute teacher and student tutors in helping every child reach the high standards that they have been promised under this heterogeneous teaching model. In addition, will you assure parents that the children will not be left behind or left unchallenged? It's only fair to ask that you kindly provide a curriculum for every grade, math curriculum that highlights how this multi-level instruction is going to take place. I will email these questions to all board members and hope to get a reply from one of you at least. Thanks.
Thank you. And finally, we have Jeff Weiner.
Good evening. Thank you for hearing me today. My name is Jeff Weiner. I'm the Public Policy Director at Jewish Family and Children's Services. And I'd like to talk to you about social emotional learning in the context of the plan, and specifically Action 3.02 on wellness centers. It looks like the action calls for professional development to support social emotional learning, SEL, implementation in elementary and middle schools. However, it doesn't propose the same at the high school level, even though it does propose to continue to provide wellness center services to support student mental health at the high schools. And while this is of course important, I do want to point out that professional learning for educators around SEL is every bit as important at high school as it is at the elementary and middle school level. And of course, I don't know the inside details of the specific, the development of the LCAP, but it sounds like you may feel that the needs are being addressed already through the wellness centers for high school students, which is great. But in reality, all teachers and staff still need professional development on SEL. And I'm presuming that no wellness centers exist at the lower levels, and maybe you feel like you're filling the void through teacher training and social emotional learning. I may be wrong about that again, and I apologize if not. But the suggestion I would make, and perhaps the best suggestion, which related to SEL, is that at the high school level, given the circumstances and the impacts of the last year, it would be wise to provide additional training and professional development for high school teachers and educators in SEL. And in recognizing the signs in students who may need to be referred to the wellness centers. So as you can see, the two concepts of mental health and SEL, they kind of fit together, but they are in fact two very different things. And it appears that the district's viewpoint may be that younger kids need SEL and older kids need mental health or wellness centers, when in reality, both need both. So I would suggest respectfully that you consider adding SEL professional development for high school level educators and teachers. And that's my only comment. Thank you for hearing me, and good evening.
Thank you very much. All right. That concludes our public hearing on this. Colleagues, comments? Again, no action at this meeting. Ms. Ladimirak.
I have, I guess, just a couple comments. First, about my comments, I guess these comments are on the 2019, 2020 LCAP, the updates. There's a paragraph about mental health and social and emotional well-being. And the update notes that at the high schools, Cassie had some challenges keeping a full staff, which impacted the services that were provided to students on occasion. And I just want to say, I know Cassie has been invaluable to our students before COVID and during COVID, and we're really, really far ahead of most districts in terms of having wellness centers at our high schools and the supports we provide. But I just want to point out that as staff noted in the LCAP, turnover really has been an issue, and I believe this was the case even before COVID. So I would really love to see us explore the feasibility of bringing some therapists in-house with PAUSD, at least a couple of them, instead of contracting everybody. Sort of to follow up on the speaker's point too, I think this would, sort of help with, not only with turnover, but also with really incorporating mental wellness more into the fabric of our school communities. As opposed to being something that's separate and just located in the wellness centers. Having a staff person who's part of our district and who stays around and who kids see, it sort of help with that creating trusted adults idea, and easier to push services into classrooms. So I just wanted to make that comment because I saw that staff had noted the turnover problem. Do you want to, should I keep going?
Please.
Okay. Then this was a quick one. I noticed the update noted that the completion of the special education handbook was delayed due to COVID. And my understanding is that that handbook, it's still not complete, but that it's been included as an action item in the disproportionality plan. And so I just wanted to confirm that that's right. So it's sort of, we have a plan for it to be completed, right? Even though it's not in new LCAP. Okay. Great. And then my final comment is about, similarly, in the staff analysis of special education, there was a fairly lengthy discussion about the directors collaborating to review our continuum of services, and also mentions about the challenges of staff retention. And again, I don't see these goals carried over in the new LCAP, and I just want to put that out there, that I think we all realize that staff retention is still something that we're struggling with as a district, and I just want to make sure that that idea of really, continuing to review the continuum of services, making sure we're serving all kids, and focusing on how we keep and retain staff. I just want to make sure that that's something that's still staying top of mind.
Thank you. Dr. DeBrienza?
Thanks. I was going to mention the special ed handbook, so that's done. And I feel like a sort of a broken record here whenever we have this hearing, but it's such a pleasure to see a document that so many of our leadership team worked on, that so many in our community participated in, that is such a comprehensive view of what we are doing, what we are committed to do. It's nice to see it. And it's so clear that so many of you engaged in this work in a way that really mattered. So I just want to thank the staff. Thanks.
All right. I'll echo my colleagues' thanks as well. And with that, why don't we move on to our next item? Before we do that, we'll take a short 5-minute break, and we'll be back at 8:38. All right. Welcome back. Moving on to item 6B, which is public hearing. We're on 6B, public hearing, proposed PAUSD budget for 2021-2022. We're going to begin our public hearing, just like the last one, and then the board will speak afterwards.
All right, thank you. I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Chow, and keeping in mind that our board has had these documents for a while and has reviewed them. I've asked her to hit the high points. We can take questions or hear your thoughts as we go. So Ms. Chow, you got it.
Thank you, Dr. Austin. So tonight's presentation on the proposed budget, we're going to start off with a brief update on the May revise. The May revise update was shared with the Fiscal Advisory Committee, and just due to the timing of the release on it, this is the first opportunity we've had to share this with the board. So a couple of the main themes from the May revise. If you heard the governor's May revise, if you heard him speak, it was all about California is roaring back, and that really has to do with the state revenue, strong economy, and the unemployment rates are coming down since the beginning of the economy. There's been a very strong investment in education spending in the May revise. And there's also, while this is very good, there's also some concerns that if these assumptions change, those the obligations will need to change as well. Last year at this time, when we were looking at adopting our district budget, the state budget was projecting a $54 billion shortfall. So things can change in a very short amount of time. Taking a look at what's included in the state budget proposal as it impacts Palo Alto USD, there's the Universal Transitional Kindergarten Program. This would be an expansion of the existing TK program. It's a 4-year rollout. The first year would be the budget year, the 21-22 as a planning year, with full implementation in 24-25. Effectively, what this would do is add an additional grade level or year of education with no additional funding. So there is an obligation, an additional obligation and no additional funding. What that means for a basic aid district like ours, we would need to redirect resources from existing programs in order to make that program happen. There's also the COLA of 5.07%. It's been added to the LCFF programs. Different COLAs have been added to other programs, and those are listed there. The governor has also put a lot of emphasis in building a teacher pipeline, and that is, money has been set aside for building a strong educator workforce in the state's budget. A couple things that are not included in the May revise, and keep in mind that the May revise is the governor's proposed budget. It then has to go through the Assembly and the State Senate. And so the version that is actually adopted next week may look different, but the May revise did not include a full payoff of the deferrals. It did not include paying down any of the STRS or PERS pension obligations, nor did it include any relief for the increase in the unemployment insurance rate. Here we see the proposed rates for the Cal STRS, the pension contributions. This is for the employer side. These are the rates that we have used in our budget and in our multi-year projections. We see the same thing here with the Cal PERS employer contribution rates. Again, these are included in our budget and as well as in our multi-year projection. This is a look at the combination of the STRS and PERS rate, both the rate increase and the dollar amount of increase. When we talked about this at the budget study session, I believe it was Mr. Dauber who wanted to see the cost increase from a dollar as well as a percentage increase. So that's what we're seeing here. In the current year and in the previous year, the state took action to buy down some of those unfunded liabilities. So you see a flattening out and a little bit of a decrease. But basically the trajectory for both is increasing rates through the next foreseeable future. Here we have a little bit of information about the unemployment insurance rate increase. Currently the rate, this is one of our statutory benefits that the district pays on the employer side, is 0.05%. The increase is projected to be 1.23% in the budget year. However, as I mentioned, the legislature is proposing a lesser amount. So if it does come down from the 1.23% in the May revise, we will adjust our budget at first interim to be reflective of what is finally adopted in the state budget. But barring no change, that increase to the 1.23% is an additional cost of $1.9 million to the district. So now we're looking at the proposed budget and taking a look at the revenue side. We have our changes in revenue over the current estimated actuals, which take us through June 30th of our current year. So we have the budgeted property tax increase at 2.25%. We have an increase on the state aid revenue. This is revenue we receive from students transferring in from Ravenswood District. This increase is based on that COLA that we saw in an earlier slide. The EPA, the Education Protection Account, this is revenue that we receive on a per student allocation. It's $200 per ADA. We're seeing a decline here because we are experiencing declining enrollment. And then we see a little bit of extra funding from the state special ed. This is AB 602 from the SELPA. Again, this is reflective of the state COLA. And then we see some pretty significant decreases in the federal and state revenues. These are due to ESSER 1 and 2 on the federal side. Now, it's because these are one-time funds. So we added them as revenue in the 2021 year. They are removed as revenue in the 21-22 year. And we see the same thing for the, on the state revenue from the in-person instruction, the extended learning opportunity, and some of the other state grants. So the decrease to the revenue over the current year is $17 million. And again, that's largely due to the removal of the one-time funds from our budget. When we look at the expenditure side of our budget, and again, this is compared to the estimated actuals, we see an increase in certificated salaries and classified salaries because we have included in here the negotiated and board-approved salary increases for all employee groups as well as step and column. We also see employee benefits increasing. Again, this is inclusive of the unemployment insurance rate increase as well as those STRS and PERS rate increases. Where we see a dip in our expenditures is in supplies and materials as well as our other operating expenses. Again, this is due to a lot of the one-time funds we're supporting activities in these areas, and those have been removed from the budget. So those expenditure areas have decreased. So overall, what we're seeing as a change to the expenditure side is an increase in expenditures of $7.7 million. So that takes us to our ending fund balance. So I would say focus to the middle of the screen for the excess deficiency and revenues over expenditures. In the current year, in the 2021 estimated actuals column, we see an ending balance or a surplus of $19.7 million. In the very next year, we see a deficit of $6 million. Normally, this would be quite an anomaly, and this would be quite shocking news to us, but as we've just gone over that removal of the one-time funds from the budget in the 2021 year is what's driving that change. So that, without those one-time funds, that might raise a few eyebrows, but we are understanding of that in this instance. So moving to the multi-year projection, again, these, what they are based on are, these are based on decisions that have been made and a series of assumptions. They are not crystal balls by any means. In fact, in terms of our own district budget, once the state budget is adopted, some of our multi-year projection assumptions will be immediately wrong. And that's okay, and we know that, and we will make those adjustments either 45 days out or at first interim. So this slide just touches on some of the things that impact multi-year projections, some of the things that drive those projections up or down, and those are listed there. When we look at our 5-year multi-year projection, this is five years out from the current budget year. We see that trend line heading in a downward fashion, and that is based on our ending fund balance, which we would expect to see because we know our ending fund balance is declining. We look at the columns that are orange and gray, and we could see that they're fairly well balanced, but in the current year, we see that revenue is ahead of expenditures. And we would expect to see that based on the previous slide where we have $19 million to our ending fund balance. In the very next year, there's a shift. The expenditures are outpacing the revenue slightly, and that's what's leading to our deficit spending in the next 2 to 3 years, and then we balance out in 24, 25. So here, just a bit on district reserves. These are some of the drivers or reasons why having a healthy reserve can be very beneficial to a district. As you'll note, the purple ball on the right side is us to a T. While many of these fit our district, that one is specific to us as a community funded district or basic aid district. The reason I'm mentioning reserves is that this was also mentioned in the May revise. So some of you may have heard or read about this as part of the May revise. In the January budget, the governor proposed making a contribution to the rainy day fund of $3 billion. Due to the increase in state revenue. In the May revise, the governor upped that amount to $4.6 billion. The significance of that is that that $4.6 billion meets the rainy day fund of 3% and triggers the cap on district reserves. However, as we saw in the previous slide and is recognized by the legislature, basic aid districts do need to have higher reserves. And so basic aid districts, as well as some very small districts, are exempt from that reserve cap. So taking a look specifically at our district reserves, in the current year, and this is the combination of the general fund as well as Fund 17. So that's how that reserve amount is calculated, by looking at the sum of the two. Our reserve level for this year is projected to be 23%, about the same for next year. And then in 23-24, we dip just below 18%. So how do we compare to the statewide average when we're looking at reserve levels? Well, as you can see, for a unified district, we're right kind of on target where most average districts fall. However, I do think it's important to note that these are average reserve levels for each category of these districts, and these are not specific to basic aid districts. So coming up next, the budget has been available for review since Friday. If any member of the public wanted to take a look at it. The budget and LCAP public hearing is tonight. And then both of them will be presented to the board at the next board meeting for adoption. In between that time, the state will take action to adopt its budget on June 15th. And then we revisit this budget again in December. And this is where we make changes to staffing and any other areas of the budget. Once school has started and we know what our classes are, we know what our staffing and program needs are, and we're making those changes in December. So that's the proposed budget in a nutshell, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody may have.
Thank you. Before we do that, we'll continue with the public hearing and take 2 comments. Each member of the public will have 2 minutes to speak. 3 minutes to speak. We have Jeremy Ehrman and Lori Myers.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. With all due respect, I don't believe that the budget that you've been given accurately reflects the number of employees that have been laid off due to COVID, just as the budget from last year did not accurately reflect the number of employees laid off or de facto furloughed due to COVID. I say that because I am apparently one of those employees. Before the pandemic, I was working about 10 to 11 hours a week for the 2 of the middle school choirs playing piano. This was pretty much my dream job. COVID hit. I was actually there on the 13th when everything had to close down. And since then, obviously I've had no work because there was no choir classes in person for months. And I tried to keep in touch with the district. The district virtually did not keep in touch with me. I tried to find out what was happening. I finally got a little information in March when things started to reopen, that some of my emails were not returned. And just last week, I was suddenly casually informed that I have no job in the fall when things are supposed to fully reopen. I was given no advance warning, no notification. This was the first thing anyone said all year about my employment status or hours. I was told there was no job to offer me for next year. No one ever said the job I had was taken away. So there was no conversation, nothing at all whatsoever information. So I have to assume I'm not the only person in this boat. There are probably lots of other classroom aides, part-time classified employees who have no union protection. And so who basically are treated as if they don't exist, because I was basically ignored during the pandemic. And I tried to keep in touch. And then, as I said, some of my emails were ignored. So I was given no formal notification, no nothing. I assumed I had a job to come back to, and apparently I don't. So whatever you've been told about the number of people laid off, like last year you ceremoniously laid off 6 employees, but the number is far, far, far higher. And so I'm not trying to pick a fight here, but you should know that the impact of COVID on this district is far more than what you are saying and what you have been told. So, and this is a problem with being a part-time employee. I graduated from Gunn High School. I've worked off and on for this district since 1997 in all sorts of music and theater programs. And I thought I finally found like the perfect job. And then I was ignored for the last 15 months and then casually told that I have no work to return to. So, now my unemployment insurance will run out in September and I have to somehow find a job in a job market where the arts have been completely shut down for about a year and a half. So, I don't know what to do. And I really wish that Palo Alto could have treated me with a little bit more respect after all that I've given to them over the years. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Lori Myers, Rebecca Eisenberg, and Star Teach Out.
Hello, thank you for taking my comments. I'm speaking today in reference to the proposed budget for Action 6 in the LCAP, which calls for over $285,000 for equity, including required workshops for staff focused on bias, anti-racism, and culturally responsive teaching. I've done extensive research.
Ms. Myers, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to cut you off, but this agenda item is not about the LCAP.
I understand, but this is a budget item. It's $285,000. I've done extensive research into anti-racism workshops for educators. While some accomplish our shared goals of bridging the divide and addressing racism and discrimination of all types, others exacerbate the problem. As an example, one of the workshops recently under consideration by our neighbor, Fremont Union High School District, featured a speaker who was also part of the PAUSD 21-day racial equity challenge this spring, who wrote an article called, quote, "Stop Talking, White Man, Interrupting Patterns of Participation in School Staff Meetings," and wrote another article that says, quote, "White supremacy culture seeps around our organizations like overflowing sewage. It stinks." What concerns me is that I've heard this language in my son's high school English class at Gunn on Zoom. The class was reading A Raisin in the Sun, and the teacher wouldn't read a certain part because he said the author wouldn't have wanted a white person to read that part in the play.
Ms. Myers, if the comment should be related to the agenda item, and this is a budget item.
It is a budget item. It's $285,000, and that's budget. So I'd like to continue. You can imagine how my white 18-year-old son felt when he heard that he wouldn't be wanted because of his race. We wouldn't tell a gender fluid student that he can't play the part of a girl, but we can tell my son he can't play a part because of his skin color. This is the kind of false anti-racism we need to avoid. I'm asking the district to have a transparent process for evaluating and selecting staff equity PD providers and involve all stakeholders in the selection process, including the broad parent community, so that the anti-racism training selected ultimately fights bigotry instead of spreading it. And so we have a smooth and non-controversial adoption. I'm looking forward to being part of this transparent process. Thank you.
Rebecca Eisenberg, Star Teach Out.
Thank you. Wow, I think $285,000 is not nearly enough to teach a curriculum against racism. For example, one thing that can be taught is that racism impacts people who are discriminated against on the basis of their race, and white people are not in that category. That is, that is actually not racism. So, but there are certainly lessons that I think we all need to learn, and, or I should say instead that we all need to discuss more and more, and $285,000 is certainly not nearly enough to address the problems that this district faces. But I wanted to talk about the budget generally speaking. a budget, as those of us who've taken, business accounting classes or worked in the work world or managed P&Ls like myself know, is that there are actually two parts to a budget. There's the input, the revenues in, and then there's the expenses out. I fear that for a long time, I observe for a long time that the district fails actually to account for its actual assets and is writing off a huge portion of its assets that it fails to actually leverage for revenue. And based on that misunderstanding of its assets, it describes itself as having a much smaller capacity to spend money than it actually has. For example, the 35 acres of land that the Palo Alto School District owns at Cubberley. If the school district were a for-profit business, or even if it were a nonprofit, the board of directors actually maybe already have been sued many times over for a concept called waste of assets, which means that if an organization owns something extremely valuable and fails to leverage it for revenue, that actually causes a reduction in value. And that certainly has been the case. For example, the Cubberley was so profoundly abandoned that PG&E actually was able to put an easement there that was located there for months before anyone at the school district actually noticed. Similarly, you simply, if you just leverage the Cubberley Center of land appropriately, for example, putting teacher housing there is not just an expense, but it actually creates revenue, and all of the plans are revenue positive. If you just leverage that site effectively, then you would have a lot more money. There's still time to do this, and with that money, you need to spend a lot more on students and teachers. It is outrageous how big the class sizes are, especially during a recovery from a pandemic. You need to do better. Thank you.
Thank you. Star Teach Out.
Hello. I wanted to ask sometime in the next year, if the budget does seem to be more positive, as it does appear to be, whether you might consider reaching out to our high school instructional leads and get a feel for how the reduction in their time has impacted their jobs at our high schools. Having just completed our WASC process on our site council, our instructional leads are really an integral part of fulfilling the promise and some of our WASC goals. And I really see them as sort of the equivalent of coach players. They're in the classroom as well as in a leadership position. So if you would have time sometime in the next year to revisit that decision and possibly restore some of that time, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes the public hearing portion of this item. Colleagues, comments? Ms. Latimerek?
I just have one question. Ms. Chow, I have a question about the universal pre-K for 4-year-olds. I know that the governor and the legislature right now are sort of differing on the specifics and timing, but regardless of where they ultimately end up, it seems pretty clear that this is coming and it's going to be a big increase in ongoing costs for us. Like you said, we're adding a new grade, basically. So assuming this gets resolved in the state budget by the end of June, do you have any idea of just ballpark when we could expect to see sort of your initial financial modeling on what that would look like for us?
So what is proposed in both the governor's budget as well as in the legislature's plan is to use the 2021 year as a planning year. And then the rollout based on the legislature's plan would be an extra year rollout. So instead of moving the birth date back for eligible 4-year-olds by 3 months, like the governor's plan, it's 2 months in the legislature's plan. So we do have some time to find out what's in the state budget. There's also a big push by certain advocacy groups for education around making sure that basic aid districts, all districts get funded appropriately for adding this extra year of education. So I think there's a few things that are very pivotal to this point or to this program, and we need to see how those pan out and build them into our planning year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Collins.
Just the one other minor point on that, and just testing my understanding, Ms. Chow. One TK, just like kindergarten is optional in California, I assume TK is going to be optional as well. So, the other question is going to be is how big is our TK going to be? And it's probably going to be smaller than our other grades. Do you have any planning thoughts about that? Is there any received wisdom out there in the CBO community?
I'd really like to see what the trailer bill language looks like in terms of, right now we only have 3 classrooms of TK. So would that mean offering 3 classrooms of universal TK? And there's a lot of questions around that I think still need to be defined.
Okay. All right. I just want us to be careful about talking about, it's correct to say it's a 14th grade, but it may not be the same size as the other grade. So let's just calibrate appropriately.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Collins. Colleagues, no more questions here. All right, thank you. Let's move on to our last public hearing, which is item 6C, and that is the review of resolution 2020-21.15 for EPA funds.
So this item is...
Oh, sorry, yeah. Let's begin.
Thank you. This item is to be presented at a public hearing regarding the spending plan for our EPA funds. Our EPA funds are the state funds that we receive from Prop 30, and then were renewed by Prop 55. We get roughly $2.1 million in total. These are the funds that come to us, as we saw earlier, on the allocation of $200 per student. Our district is using those funds in its entirety for teacher salaries and benefits.
Okay, thank you. We do have one member of the public who wishes to speak, Rebecca Eisenberg. Ms. Eisenberg, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, did I mute myself?
We can hear you.
Oh, yay, good. I'm going to be really short. I agree. I totally think that this money should be spent on teacher salaries and benefits, that's how we're going to recruit and retain the best teachers. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Board colleagues, comments? All right. Actually, sorry. There, I adjourned the public hearing. Comments? None? Very well, this will come back on for action at the following meeting. Okay, moving on to item D, authorization to issue an addendum to LPA Architects for schematic design services for Hoover.
Okay, items D through F will be with Dr. Golden.
Hi, good evening. As far as this item is concerned, Eric Holm, our Director of Facilities, who is present, has been the point person on this planning effort. I'm going to ask him to do the presentation, and then he and I will be available to respond to questions as needed.
Thank you. You guys hear me okay?
We can.
Great. When the board previously unpaused the Hoover project in the last board meeting last month, we indicated we would study our path forward. And this item is a reaction to that, or a result of that. And what we would like to do is engage with LPA Architects to study multiple options for how we want to proceed with Hoover. The main thing we have realized with the Hoover project is that with a very tight compressed site, it is going to be a very difficult multi-year build that will significantly impact construction. And that impact was going to be difficult under pre-COVID times, and would definitely be difficult now. And so at a minimum, we are not starting that project until we are no longer in a mask wearing situation. And we're trying to assess what other solutions are. And one of the things we will look at is the addition of having the Coverly campus available, that extra space, is to look at if we can relocate and do swing space over there and actually provide a entire campus for the contractors to build. This was a strategy the district used with the Garland site years ago with the Nixon modernization, relocating the entire campus there. And so we're starting to study opportunities like that. And then given that opportunity, that opens up other potentials for looking at the design for how to rephase it, whether we should increase the scope, reduce the scope, all the way to changing building designs or redesigning entirely. And so we want to study all of those factors and options over the course of the summer and come back to you in the fall with a study session and propose a path forward for the most effective and efficient Hoover build.
Great, thank you. Colleagues? Mr. Collins.
I guess it's good that we're doing that. I feel, I mean, this project has not gone well over the several years that it's been being planned. And I asked, starting when this appeared on the agenda, for some clarity about how this project compares to the other elementary school projects that we've done under our bond program, which are Duveneck, Ohlone, Fairmeadow, and Addison. And, as of this afternoon, I really haven't been able to get what I consider a clear answer to that question. So I don't really understand what the scope of the project is. I don't understand how it compares to the prior project that we've done. Now, apparently, we're considering even scraping the whole site and building a new elementary school from scratch, which had never been considered before and certainly hasn't been considered at any of the other projects that we've ever done. By comparison, the projects at Duveneck, Ohlone, and Fairmeadow, which were done, less than 10 years ago, all completed less than 10 years ago, were in the range of $7 to $12 million. And I think we were pretty happy with those projects. Addison, which was donor funded, substantially bigger project, was about $25 million. So yeah, I just want to make sure it feels like this feels like my kitchen project from 8 years ago, which started out as let's get new countertops and ended in tears. So I just want to make sure I really don't want to end in tears here, because once we start down a path, it's hard to turn back. We set expectations, and this one seems to have a one-way ratchet on it, where it seems to keep going up and broader and broader. And I still don't have a good sense of what is this project really meant to accomplish, and how does it relate to the other projects that were done before? So I'd really like to get, there's no vote to be taken tonight, but I'd really like to get a strong sense of that and try to just calibrate to make sure what we're doing is what we should be doing, and why these numbers are so much higher than the projects that we did before that were kind of viewed as the typical elementary school upgrades that we had planned to do. So that's something that I'm requesting of staff. Staff has my emails, and I'll send a little more information about what I'm looking for, and maybe other board members want different things, but I would love to see that. Thank you.
Colleagues?
Well, I just want to agree with what Mr. Collins said. I would like more. This is a lot of dollars, and that's being discussed, and I would certainly like to understand what the thinking is around the charge that's being given to the architects around the schematic design. I think it'd be useful to have a fuller conversation about that before we go down the road.
Okay. I'll just, one thing I'll also say, Mr. Holm or staff, next time this item comes up, I think there was a lot of information provided via emails that might be added into the agenda item for next session, in addition to some of the detail that's been requested, so that we can all see it and the public can see it as well. I think the agenda item is a great place for some of that context and background for next time. All right, if there are no other comments on this, then let's move on to the next item, which is going to be item E, schematic design for green.
Good. So this is again a discussion item, no action required. This item is, well, we finished our conceptual design in very late 2000, and now 6 months later, we're back with the schematic design. There haven't been material changes. As you know, we had a serious conversation with community regarding the conceptual design. We've met with them again prior to submitting this schematic design to the board, and the conversations were very positive. Tom Hodges is here, and he'll do a very brief presentation. I've advised him that unlike the 3-minute limit, he now has a 5-minute limit starting right now.
Okay, can I get my the screen sharing, or if you pull up the slides, that's fine too, as long as I can see them. You guys see the slides okay?
Yes.
All right. So we can go to the next slide. So just have about 10 slides to go through. The design has not changed really at all since you saw this back in December. Again, we did a lot of hard work with the neighbors, and we really wanted to kind of hold true to that design that we agreed to in December. So what you're going to see is very similar to that, but it's just developed a lot more. So this first slide is really just an overall site plan. We can go to the next slide. It has a little more, a little closer. As you can see, we have the CTE wing, which is basically where the H wing is now, which is a 1-story classroom wing. Then going down on the left side is a library, which sits on the 2nd level and will be over an outdoor eating area. And then you see the quad in the middle, which is going to be all new. And then we do have a new futures classroom and wellness center that's going to go where the vacated library is. So next slide would be great. So here is just a little blow up of our CTE wing. You can see there's going from right to left, 3 standard classrooms. Then we start our CTE classroom suite, where we have our foods or consumer skills class, a design studio classroom, and then we have actually got a shared multimedia classroom with the broadcast studio off that. And then you can see to the far left, that's our industrial technology suite that includes a lab space, some support spaces, and some classroom space. You go to the next slide, please. This is just real quick, this is the food service, and you can see we have seating for students, over 400 students. If there is any, if it's rainy or not comfortable in the day, that was a big goal for the site, was to, really improve the food service experience for the students. If you can go to the next slide. This is the upstairs library space that sits on top of the past slide. So you go up a monumental stair, which I'll show you in a future slide. You go up into the library space that you see. It has a library classroom, some workrooms, collaboration room, a computer lab that replaces the one next to the current library, and then one more classroom. So that's our upstairs space. Next slide. And then this last slide is the vacated library spaces that will remain. And you can see that futures classroom on the left side, and then the wellness center on the right side. Next slide. So we have about 4 slides of aerials or renderings from our architect. This is a if you're flying in a drone above the F wing looking back at our building, you can see the quad in the middle, the library on the left, and then that CTE wing on the right. Next slide. So we have some ground level views. This one on the left is of the library, looking at it from the edge of the new single-story wing. And then you can see on the right-hand side, this is just looking down that corridor. The big thing here, just to point out sort of the sun shading that we're doing, we do have kind of a severe west exposure. So you'll see on both the library and this corridor space that we've incorporated some sun shading. Next slide. And this is again, kind of looking at the same, the library space. The one on the left, looking at it from where the library sits now, looking at that sort of grand, I don't want to say grand stair, but it's more of a stair where students can hang out and also go up to the library. And then on the right-hand side, this is really to show kind of what that underneath eating area looks like. Next slide. And then two more views. This is of the upstairs at the top of the stair, looking towards the library and those sunshades I was mentioning. And then the last one on the right-hand side, that's just a view of what the library looks like. Again, looking at the sunshades and out onto that quad space. So those are our slides, and be happy to answer any questions. As you can see, it's really very similar to what we presented back in December, but it's just been developed to another level.
Great, thank you. Colleagues, comments, questions? Okay, thank you both very much for the presentation. Let's move on to item F, Pally Tower renovation project.
This is another discussion item. At this juncture, after we've done the conceptual design, the schematic design, we do construction documents and we send them off to DSA, where they reside for 7 months, 8 months, something like that, while they're being analyzed. We've included in the packet, so the older slides that we did for this Pally Tower, but the fact remains nothing's really changed since schematic design. This is going to be quite a project. This is going to be an incredible exemplary building when it's done. It's really exciting. Currently, the project remains within the budget estimate. As you know, the big proof is when it's actually bid out. So here it is, and we'd like authorization to send it on to DSA.
Okay, great. We do have a member of the public who wishes to comment on this item. All right, Rebecca Eisenberg. Ms. Eisenberg, you have 3 minutes.
Awesome. This is a $20 million budgeted project to renovate Pally High School's administration building, to retrofit it. $20 million is set aside, although the initial estimate is only 13 million. But if anyone who's ever had budgets before could attest that the cost ends up taking up the entire budget. So $20 million to retrofit the Pally administration building. That needs to be rethought. I recognize that Measure Z funds cannot be spent on the things that actually benefit students the most. Those things being more teachers, more staff, more teachers' aides, more classrooms, like the other two projects would provide. Measure Z actually could do that, but it's not being even suggested when it comes to Pally. But of course, what we really need more than any classrooms, is we need more teachers, we need more staff, we need those teachers and staff to be treated better. But Measure Z can't do that. But what Measure Z can do are far more important things than this. Should we retrofit Pally's admin building? Of course, but does a retrofit really need to cost this much money? Really? It seems like you could actually build an entire new building for less than that. At least this could be looked into now that we have the pandemic. I think that you won't do what I'm suggesting or even consider it, but maybe you'll think about it. With these Measure Z funds, I can tell you the reason that I voted for Measure Z, and I convinced everyone I know to vote for Measure Z is because in that Measure Z materials was a promise that you actually would use some of those funds to develop Cubberley. And in lots of the propaganda surrounding Measure Z were references to things like teacher housing. Measure Z can be used for capital improvements. What capital improvements do we need right now in the largest housing crisis our state has ever seen? We need housing for teachers because that is the way we'll attract the best teachers, we'll retain the best teachers. It's the way we can get teachers to come to school earlier and stay later. These things that so many teachers refuse to do, in part because they have 2-hour commutes and they're just not treated well. And they take it out on the kids. So everything could be improved if you could please just reallocate these funds to projects that will actually help our community a lot more. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, comments, questions? Dr. DeBrianza?
I just, as someone on the property committee, I know Mr. Drop and I have seen this a lot of times. I mean, I think we generally don't have comments about any property committee items because we've already just had all our questions answered. But I think that this renovation, I mean, is a really special one, right? Yeah, it is a lot of money. The intention is not to get a new building. The intention is that this is our first high school. This is a historic building. This is a building that costs a lot to retrofit because it's 100 years old. And I'm excited that we're doing it. It looks like a really great project, and I hope it's going to be one of our buildings for a really long time.
All right. Thank you for that. And I think it's valuable also to point out that this has space for wellness, for special education, and that has a lot of value to students, especially those who tend to need those services the most. Okay. No other comments on this one? Then let's move on from our discussion items. Thank you, Mr. Hodges and Dr. Colton. Item 7A, staff reports, elementary K through 5 ELA, instructional materials.
Okay, I'm going to touch this one real quick, and then we'll see if Ms. Brown needs to tag on. We do not bring all items forward for instructional material adoptions. Typically, that just happens on a cycle. This one is a little out of cycle, which is why we've put it on. I've had it in at least 2 updates and spoken to it from this seat before, too. We want no surprises on this one. It is unique in that we have not had an ELA adoption in grades K through 5 for more than 20 years. So that's different. That's I can't think I've ever said those words before. More than 20 years without the adoption does not mean that we haven't been teaching ELA. It means it's been pieced together in different ways. English language arts, by the way, for people that are watching tonight. This is certainly a cornerstone of our literacy push, which you heard about earlier in the evening. But we're excited, and Ms. Brown will be leading this from the district side, and already has I don't know that I'd say all, but a large committee already in place. There was no shortage of enthusiasm for this particular topic. So with that, Ms. Brown, if there's anything to add, feel free.
I think you covered it very well. The group is very excited and we're ready to go.
All right, board colleagues. Dr. DeBrianza?
Well, one question was going to be, how are you picking staff and community members? But it sounds like you already have your committee. And there was a lot of interest. Great.
Yes, very much so.
Great, that's wonderful. It seems like a really tight timeline if you pilot 3. Are you shooting for 3? Are you shooting for 2? Do you know yet?
I think we're shooting for 3 is in our calendar that we have set out so far.
Okay, I trust y'all. It looks fast, but good luck.
All right. Ms. Ladimira.
Yeah, I have a question, and first of all, I just want to say I recognize that I'm new to the board, and I have essentially no knowledge of the specifics around this very long, complicated process for curriculum adoption. So if this question is answered somewhere, please tell me that. But I'm wondering, as Ms. DiBrienza mentioned, piloting 2 or 3 programs, it sounds like, is it possible for one or all of those programs we pilot to be a hybrid, like the plan that we are doing next year? Right, so I ask this because it seems to me that no one program is probably, well, is unlikely to be sufficient. And I think about how we just did the supplementary adoption for stamped. And it very well might be that the social studies curriculum that we adopted was the best out there and we still needed more. And so I think another example could be, well, sort of like what we're doing next year, right? We're doing the units of study and then we're adding OG, which may or may not be the place where we end up, but it just occurs to me that if the point of piloting is to try a few things out, I'd like to understand how much creativity we have within that. So I guess do we pilot a few programs that staff from the get-go feels won't be sufficient, and then we try to supplement later, or can we kind of do all of that at once? I guess that's my question.
Sure. So when we pilot, there's a whole process by which you winnow down to the programs you pilot. And then when you do pilot, you have already a predetermined evaluation of the tools, through a form that students, teachers and parents fill out. Students might be a little harder, the younger ages, but for sure, older students can participate in that. And then usually we pilot with fidelity to the program, or you're not going to know whether it's a good program or not and how much you're going to need to supplement or not. I haven't had this happen, but if you're in the midst of a pilot and it's so bad, you can abandon it and we'll bring that to you with the information. But so far we have had pretty good success in our winnowing down, our vetting process to land with at least 2, sometimes 3 programs that are pretty competitive with one another.
So then it's pretty safe to say that what we approved, sort of the literacy initiative that we approved with the units of study plus the OG phonics, that's not going to be something that's piloted? Or?
Well, we have to go through what the options are and do a comparison of the programs and what their components are and what they all include.
Let me take an additional shot at that answer. We're all going to say the same thing. It just might come out a little different. You would not start with piecing things together, but we may end with a supplement piece. So the program that we will adopt, okay, will be solid. It'll be a whole, but the whole will have pieces that we will likely want to supplement because almost nothing is perfect. So in the end, we could end up with something, let's just say hypothetically, we could end up with what we're putting in place next year, which is a whole that had a piece that we really don't like, and we replaced it with something else. That could happen. But we will not start, I don't see a scenario, I've never seen it, where you would start with piecing things together. If we ask the right questions throughout, we're going to get to something that's going to identify the strengths of every program and then say which program has holes we can live with, and then you backfill those. That would be very typical.
Okay, great. That answers. So it's sort of like my stamped example, but in a compressed time frame. So rather than years after social studies curriculum was adopted, saying, oh, we're this hole, it's sort of like we're piloting, and then at the same time sort of thinking through what holes are and
Yes.
Maybe ending up with something that's hybrid, but that's not what we're piloting. We're piloting something more cohesive. Okay,
You typically pilot pure. Okay.
great, thanks.
Okay. Further questions, comments? All right. Thank you for bringing back this item so quickly after we discussed it at the last meeting. All right, let's move on to item 7B, professional learning.
We skipped you, Kelly.
We're excited about this. I'll tell you right now, we are not going to spend the time on this that it could demand because the work that's gone into this and what we do, I'm just going to frame this up real quick before I turn over to Ms. Ofek, is about as close to unparalleled as you can get. The breadth, the depth of the program, the commitment of resources is unlike anything I've seen by some multiplier. And we're lucky to have Dr. Bickle here, who is a big reason why our program is as good as it is. And I love the way that she has organized things into the buckets under our PAUSD promise. And we also are tonight going to try to show you a little bit about what's mandatory. Very easy. Let me back up. It's easy to say, let's add more mandatory. Very hard when you start to look at what that really means without pulling some other things out, which is always an option, right? The old Doug Reeves idea of weed the garden before you add anything new. But we really want to show you some representations of what that looks like. So, Ms. Opek, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Austin, although I don't really know that I have much more to say. So this evening, we're happy to share with you the professional learning plan and budget for next school year. Dr. Bickle will share the high-level categories which are aligned to the PAUSD promise and the accountability plans that you heard about earlier this evening and previous meetings. The presentation is designed to give you an idea of what PD happens during the school year and what is required versus what is optional. So with that, I'll turn things over to Dr. Bickle.
Thank you and good evening. So the professional learning plan, as Ms. Ofek shared, is aligned to the district goals outlined in the PAUSD promise. The area of high quality teaching and learning focuses on standards and curriculum implementation and instructional practices in identified areas. The wellness and safety category focuses on equitable and inclusive culture and climate. Areas of focus in this category include restorative practices, responsive classroom, and trauma-informed practices. Equity is included in two important ways in the professional learning plan. It is its own category with a focus on system-wide work to grow leadership capacity and expand existing equity workshop offerings. And equity is also woven throughout all the goals in the plan. In the attachment, you'll notice the connections to equity are highlighted within each goal. And finally, the routine areas of focus category includes items that are foundational and ongoing work. Compliance and mandatory trainings are topics that are required by law, ed code, or board policy. Requirements vary by job category and responsibilities. The list on this slide is the minimum time and topics for teachers and adds up to about 4.5 hours. Teachers in 3rd to 8th grade and 11th grade have another 1 to 2 hours of training for CASP test administration. I do want to emphasize that this list is the minimum to meet our obligations. We can consider it the floor, if you will. Currently, staff meeting time is utilized to complete these trainings in August or September, which definitely creates a time challenge at the beginning of the school year. Before I dive into this slide, one item that isn't reflected here is orientation. So each year, new teachers attend 3 days of orientation before the rest of the staff comes back that focuses on district initiatives, curriculum, and PAUSD practices to support our new teachers in feeling ready and able to dive into the school year and to connect with their colleagues. Each year, PAUSD has 3 dedicated professional learning days, and the focus areas are determined by site or district goals. For elementary next year, the October Professional Learning Day will focus on literacy assessment in support of the Every Student Reads initiative. The January and March dates will focus on equity with a literacy and/or math focus, with more details to come. Secondary areas of focus include a deep dive into academic equity and culture and climate equity. These 2 themes will guide the work across the 3 days. In Palo Alto, we are fortunate to provide lots of additional professional learning across the year. In alignment with the categories that are listed on the slide here, our options are given to teachers during summertime, sub-release time, or after school. So we are very excited about this plan, and it represents really strong collaboration across all departments. And as always, the main challenge is time for participation and ongoing implementation and support. Thank you, and I'm happy to hear questions and comments.
Thank you. Before we get to board comments, we do have members of the public who'd like to speak. You will each have 3 minutes. Linda Hennigan, Nayeli Gomez, Star Teach Out.
All right, hello, good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I wanted to reiterate the depth and the breadth of community support for the professional development that's described in this budget item that teachers need in order to transform their teaching and their classrooms into fully equitable places for learning. Over 140 people co-signed the letter that's included in tonight's board packet. The co-signers include 75 parents of elementary through high school students, 40 parents of alumni, 13 PAUSD alumni, 9 community members, 6 former PAUSD board members, and the Palo Alto League of Women Voters. So the support for this initiative is very wide and very strong. This work will not be comfortable for everyone. It will not be easy. Parents and teachers and staff and students need to stop reacting to anti-racist work out of anger, fear, guilt, or shame. No one particular person in this community is responsible for racist actions that were taken in the past, nor for racist systems that persist in the present. And yet we can all learn about them together now and work together to ensure a better and more equitable future for us all. We have an opportunity to learn and grow together as a community. This professional development for staff and teachers will help us get there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nayeli Gomez, Star Teach Out, Rebecca Eisenberg.
Hi, good night. I'm Nayeli Gomez. I have 2 kids in the school district.
Ms.
I'm an
Gomez, is
engineer.
it possible to speak up a little bit? We're having some trouble hearing you.
Oh. Can you hear me now? Or
Barely.
let me see. Let me just take this off. Can you hear me now?
It's difficult. We'll try our best, and why don't we restart Ms.
Can you hear
Gomez's
me now?
timer?
Can you hear me now?
We can. It's very soft, but we can hear you.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Okay. Oh, hello, I'm Nayeli Gomez. I have 2 kids in the school district. I'm an engineer and a business coach, and I have taught math in college, middle and high school level, but my specialization is not education. I trust the changes you're making, but I want to make sure that kids want to keep moving forward, have that opportunity. My rising ninth grader is one of these kids. Regarding on this anti-racism bias training, it's important to approve this for educators and staff training. My family has experienced bias firsthand. I have talked about this 1,000 times in my site council meetings and other forums as well. Biases are everywhere, and we can actually see it in some of the comments we have heard so far here right now, tonight. I want to emphasize this. Socioeconomical status and or race and ethnicity are not, and I repeat, are not related to the capabilities or skills a person have. Please serve better our BIPOC families. We can do better, Palo Alto. Thank you.
Thank you. Star Teach Out, Rebecca Eisenberg, David Cohen.
Hello. I know there are probably some other important PDs that may have to be deferred, but I too want to offer my support for the proposed plan, which includes the trauma-informed practices and the universal access and equity. I recently listened to a Children's Health Council presentation on parenting children with PTSD, and it reminded me that many students enter our classrooms with what may seem like normal stresses of modern life, things that might include divorcing parents or coping with the death of a grandparent or a family friend or the loss of a parent's employment or being bullied or fears of losing your home. Even climate change can actually impact young students. I've seen it myself who live in fear that the world may not exist in a year. Not to mention things like college admissions and even just living in a home that can be chaotic. And so I know this is a little bit of a tangent perhaps to what this PD is targeting, but I think anything that can bring us together and to hear another person's point of view is just so valuable. And It's very easy to assume that topics that are focused on specific populations are not beneficial to all students, but I reject that assumption because I always find that the more I am exposed to and make connections with people who supposedly are unlike me, the more unified I feel after having had contact with people. So I just want to say I do support this and I hope you do too. Thank you.
Thank you. Rebecca Eisenberg, David Cohen.
Thank you. I strongly support the proposed professional education proposals, but I also strongly believe that they do not go far enough. Despite what the top brass says, professional development has always been an area of weakness in Palo Alto Public Schools. It continues to be one, although this plan moves it in the right direction, a direction it needs to be moved in more strongly. As others said, and here are some areas of urgent need. Number one, as others have said, and I spoke about earlier, anti-racism training is essential. It literally, kids' lives depend on it. You need to invest more in this. You must invest more. Gender inclusion. There are few teachers, I have been told, who truly have embraced the practices of full gender inclusion, including empowering individuals to specify their pronouns, refraining from binary and heteronormative expressions of gender and sexuality, and requiring students to choose between and they do require students to choose between the limiting, dual, insufficient categories of male and female when many students are neither, both, or change between them. Come on, it's 2021. We need to be more inclusive on all measures, including gender. It's really quite easy and it costs nothing. Title IX continues to be a problem. And victim blaming continues to be a problem, both with Title IX and with regard to race-based harassment and assault. This is a known and easily observed problem. Last fall, for example, there was an incident where former Pali students, women, shared their personal experiences of sexual assault at Pali. These women described the assaults that happened to them. In some cases, they named the perpetrator. When this was discussed at schools, and I think even at this board meeting, it was described as a social media problem, not as a sexual assault problem. Women and people of color are not to blame for reporting incidents of violence against them. The problems actually are those who perpetrate the violence, not the victims of it. Last but not least, compliance with special education. I know that you get sued for this all the time because I read all of the settlement agreements and the money you paid. It'd be so much easier just to do a better job training teachers and non-special ed staff what it means to have an IEP or a 504, help teachers understand that this means they do have to work a little harder to provide accommodations, and that is their obligation and they can't opt out of it. And it doesn't help when the administrators second them.
Thank you. David Cohen.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here. I'm an English teacher at Pali, vice president of PAEA, speaking strictly in my own behalf here tonight. This is not follow up on any discussion from PAEA. Just want to add my voice and support along similar lines to what you've heard before, and appreciate and ask in the future that we continue to look for balance. There are some competing good inclinations that can come up when it comes to professional learning. And this often comes up even between sites in the unified district, how to sort of settle the competing values and interests in having uniformity and consistency, and also allowing for innovation and customization. So when it comes to professional learning, what I'm suggesting is that while we want everyone on the same page in terms of certain baseline skill sets and understandings of our obligations and our mission, we also need to find ways to differentiate some of our professional learning. And I'm not suggesting that's not happening. I just want to make sure it continues to allow people who are at different stages in their own professional learning and professional journeys to continue to push forward in ways that suit them and then best serve their students. Also, another area of potential balance would be to make use of both internal resources and high quality outside providers. Having teachers lead professional learning is something that we have done successfully in the past. In fact, we had some conferences and presentations organized by teachers. I was part of that initiative in the past, and would hope to continue to. I think it allows for greater continuity so that you don't have a training and then just sort of lose the steam, lose the connections. And then finally, to the extent that you will hear pushback about anti-racist education and pursuing greater equity, I would just say that there may be some discomfort, but some people's discomfort cannot be used to further delay the necessity of providing equity and safety and providing for the basic rights and needs of all our students. So please don't, if we hear things out of context, and examples that are intended to slow you down or make you second guess the greater good, please carry on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. All right, colleagues, comments? Dr. DiBrienza?
Thank you. I'm excited for this one. Thank you for bringing it forward, and thank you for all the work that went into putting it together. I want to also thank Mr. Cohen for his last comment about moving ahead with the anti-racism work, even though it makes some people uncomfortable. It doesn't mean we don't do it, right? And I think that we are definitely on that track, which I'm really grateful for. I have a couple of random questions here. First one is, you mentioned a bunch of optional PD that's available, and I'm wondering how teachers know about that. I don't know if there's one particular way, or it depends on what the PD is, but if there's something that is available to teachers, how do they typically find out about that?
So we have a system, My Learning Plan, where there's a district catalog, and that's the main place that teachers go to register for workshops. We haven't used it so much this year, but that has been around in the district since 2014. So that's sort of the central place that things are housed. We do market opportunities, so create flyers and send emails and try to get the word out as best we can. Principals are often our best way of getting the word out about some of our high priority workshops.
Thanks. One of the things that I was wondering about when I was looking at the mandatory list, right, is I am pretty sure that some of those, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that some of them are federally or state mandated, and some of them are district, like board policies, right? The board added them at some point. I would never advocate to get rid of Title IX training, but I'm thinking that maybe that's something the OCR required we add in. It's now part of our policies. So I think that when things were added, it was before, well, certainly I know it was before this whole board, maybe it was before any of us were here. But I do wonder, as Dr. Austin talked about, weeding before we plant new stuff. I think that we would benefit from knowing, and I don't expect that you know this on the spot, because I'm sure when you started here, it was already in place. I think we would benefit from knowing what are the mandated things externally that we have no choice but to do. And what are the things that we as a district have decided to make mandatory? Because there is a lot of competing interest, and we do know that there would never be enough time to do everything that we are interested in doing. There is a big call for anti-racism training. I sit on the LGBTQ committee, and there is a 30-minute training that the county is offering. And I know that our middle and high school students who sit on that committee have advocated, hey, I continue to experience some discrimination or some very heteronormative, behaviors from teachers. And I'm remembering, I think when I first joined the board, I think we had a training from Gender Spectrum maybe come, which was great, but it's been a number of years, right? Maybe 4 years or something since they've been here. So I think given that we'd never have enough time to do all the things that we want to do, at least looking at what are the things that we as a district have added as mandatory, and is that still our top priority? I don't think, based on the list we've seen, I don't think there's a lot of hours there, but I do think that it's good to start with a sort of a current state assessment, and then just have conversations about, based on your recommendations, of course, but you know, do we think 15 minutes of Title IX is enough? Do we need more of it? Is there something that can be combined? Is there something that we don't think is necessary to do every year? If it's something that we've made mandatory, before we start adding things on. I would like to see that at some point. I don't think it has to be a big board action, board vote, but definitely some guidance as to what our priorities are if they've changed since that was first introduced by another board. So I guess that's not a question, just something I'd like to see in the months ahead, so that we're making sure we're using that precious limited time as well as we can. I think that weekly or semi-weekly, there are staff meetings where site leaders can bring in their own sort of PD or do what they want, right? If I'm an elementary principal and I really want my teachers to have more support in implementation of bridges, I can decide to bring that into a staff meeting.
So principals organize staff meetings and oftentimes use that as an opportunity for, you know, professional learning to happen. And it's often around it's often around a district initiative, or in some instances, some of the mandated trainings that you saw listed, those get exchanged for the meeting time for the completion of those modules and whatnot.
So bloodborne pathogens.
Just depends.
It has to happen at some point, and so that might be, hey, this afternoon's staff meeting, you have to get that done, and you can do it then, or you can.
Yes, our administrators do try to get the most out of their staff meetings with their staff.
Okay, I know that earlier tonight we had a caller who I think is a staff member talking about an interest in SEL PD at the secondary level, right? And not just relying on wellness centers. And I know wellness is a priority here, and I don't know what that looks like in secondary versus elementary, but just a vote of support for that. That's it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Looking at my colleagues for any other comments. If not, thank you very much for the presentation. All right. And thank you for staying this long. Okay, moving on to board operations. Colleagues, anything to report? Hold on. Sorry, I'm skipping ahead here. My sheet is, we're on to information items. All right. We have one public member of the public who wishes to comment on an information item. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then colleagues, if you have additional comments, we can do that too. So for 8A LCAP, we've got 2 commenters, ROB and LM. You'll each have 3 minutes. Okay, LM. Okay. Colleagues, were there any comments on the information items, either 8A or the calendar? I'm just going to wait a beat until I can see. Okay. All right, none. Thank you very much. Board operations, finally. Dr. DiBrienza.
I was just realizing when I was liaising with one of my elementary schools that now is the time of year when you reassign us to new schools. And it's been a while since we've done that, since we stuck with them this past year due to COVID. And I just think I will be reaching out to you directly about one issue that's currently going on at a particular school. I think just so that you know when you're making assignments, you know, not to kind of spread them out evenly. And I just encourage my colleagues, if there's anything that you think is important that Mr. Drop know, before he makes new assignments to make sure you tell him that soon before he makes new assignments.
Great, thank you. All right, nothing else? In that case, let's adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for participating, and we'll see you next time.